Yep, 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 diddly dibbly dee, we go down, 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 ba diddly diddly ba dee ba dee. Bom bom bam ba dam ba dam ba ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da dum ba dam ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba ba dam ba ba da ba dum ba dam ba dam ba dam. We gotta make sure that we're doing what we need to do here. Doing what we need to do here. Doing what we need to do here. All right, nice wick, by the way. Good morning. The title, Nacho Dip. This ain't your dip. I was gonna say Nacho Dip, cheesy rip, but then I decided I'd probably be a little bit too on the nose. What's up? Um, here's what I think's happening. I don't know. No, I think this is kind of a really important moment for the market. I know it sounds really weird because like it's Tuesday, June 25th. You're kind of like in this motion of like, well, I don't really know. Maybe this is a bad dip and is this gonna fall? Bottom's gonna fall out. I think we're in a moment of truth today. I think today is gonna be a big deal. I don't know why. Well, I know why. I think I know why. So there's not really a lot of room for IWM to come back down. So these are small caps, right? And there's not a lot of room for it to come down much lower. I mean, you can come down maybe to like 199, but I said I really kind of wanted to see it stay above 200. And that's not exactly happened. So there was sort of a weakness there in the morning, but it's basically made like a double bottom. Now this M cross is very interesting to me because it's not even out of the trend yet, which is again kind of fascinating to me. Like all it's done is test the trend. So it, in some ways, it looks like there could be an inherent weakness because it's like, well, it didn't even push the trend really, or push the creek really. I mean, I don't really feel like that's happened, but when it pushed up, it went up to that 202 mark and it went above it, and that to me is a big deal. And I talked about it yesterday on the stream. I feel like that's the level that we're trying to get over, and once we get over it, there's going to be, and I say once we get over it, like it's got to happen. It doesn't have to happen, but if we get over it, I think that's where it's going to be like fireworks. I think you really are going to see like a massive market move. So this move is sort of like the precursor move, and it has to do certain things in order to get to this point. And one of those things is it needs to build a support over 200. It hasn't really done that yet. So if you look at the overall picture here, every time we've kind of come up around 200, there's been like gaps and or we're just kind of chopping through it. We haven't really built the strongest of supports. Like last time we kind of hit this as a support was actually, I mean, technically kind of did it Friday, but then even before that, it was in April. So I think 200 on the IWM needs to be built as a support, and that's why I think we're dropping. We left a gap. I mentioned it yesterday. Everybody could have seen it. It's not like anything fancy, but we left a gap here, and I think it was just on purpose. Like it was just a very purposeful gap. Like, okay, so you left a gap on the broader Russell 2000 ETF. You've got kind of a narrowing of RSI and the MACD at this point. Looks like it could go either way. You're kind of sitting low. If it's a even atom bottom, the reaction normally would be a lot faster. So instead, we're kind of like chopping out. And that makes me wonder if either it's a bear flag or they're teasing a bear flag, in which case, it's essentially like a trap. We mentioned that every time on these bottoms you get an M cross regardless, so it doesn't really make a huge difference at this point because we don't know. Like there's always this possibility when you look at this, you're like, oh, that could be a bear flag, and then it's not, right? So going back to every bottom that we've had on IWM over the last several years, I mean, there's always, almost always kind of a walkout to get you across moving averages, to get you across the creeks, got you across the downtrends. It's very rare that we see just kind of this rip straight out of the bottom. Usually the rip comes after that shape. So I think we're in a position right now where I can't be 100% sure, but we're in a position right now where it's kind of finishing that M shape. Like, I don't really expect it to take very long. I don't think historically these bottoms take very long. Usually they're like a half day or so, maybe like a 4-hour period. So I'm feeling like Nacho Dip. No? Maybe. Well, maybe. I don't know. Meaning, like, I think it's better just to be patient. But it was more just a goofy thing. So, I wouldn't read too much into it. I'm getting like a laggy thing. No, it's not meant to be like some kind of roaring kitty meme thing where people have to like interpret it. And people always say buy the dip, and I'm like thinking about salsa and stuff like that. So let me see if I can fix this stream health. It's like dying. I don't know. It looks fine on this end. It's just that means it's just a YouTube thing. Sorry, guys. That's a bummer. I don't like that for you. So, not yo dip. Maybe I should change the title then. So I actually don't know exactly how to read this on AMC and GME just yet. I'll be honest with you, it doesn't look great because you have this massive push up to the upside, and the only thing that's good about it, in my opinion, is that it didn't go higher than the previous high, and that it crossed the creek. So like going backwards and looking at this now retrospectively, I should say, man, this stream is like not doing well. Let me just try to reset that. Well, maybe that helps. I think in terms of a flush action, it's efficient. In terms of a RSI, it's divergent. So I don't really feel like there's a lot to this dip right now just yet. I mean, if it followed through, different story, but all I'm seeing right here is a divergence in RSI build out. I'm seeing like what could be considered like a head fake, but if not for the recovery, which we don't exactly have yet. So right now I'm like, all right, well, I'm seeing a lot of divergence on RSI. I'm not seeing any divergence particularly to the upside on the top. So really this doesn't look bad. I mean, I was kind of just joking about the dip thing, but this is actually looking fine. GME is a little different. There's no divergence on the 1 hour here. I think there's even one on the 1 hour on AMC. Of course, AMC did sell off a lot farther. Yeah, that's clearly divergent. So RSI is like turned up and price is trying to drop lower. On the volume's less than it is on this first drop, at least thus far. It could change. GME is a little different because it once again like teased out the creek. So yesterday we had pushed beyond here, and arguably you would say that, all right, well, if you're being really precise about it, then it pushed the creek up, and then this pushed the creek up again. Well, that's kind of what happened this morning, is like you got another push up. So it's like really somebody's really like knocking it back down every time. So now there's been like several different advances here, and this is the most recent one, which is first thing this morning. I'm feeling pretty good right now. I don't know if I should feel good. I feel like the market looks like it's in a free fall, but I'm feeling pretty good because I guess GME is the one that I'm like the least certain about, but I feel like if it can make a higher high here, I still think we're going to go up to, I know it's like crazy. You guys are like, you're an idiot, dude. You've been talking about this target since weeks ago. Well, maybe that's me chasing the dragon's tail a little bit. Like you're trying to like figure out like when is this going to hit, but the setup here is really clean and all it needs to do is break out. So if it can manage the breakout and get back above 27 and then find some support, I think we're just going to go. I think it's going to be a really nice big move all the way up to 34, and then we might chop even as high as the 40s. We'll see. I'm not positive about the last part of this, but I genuinely think this is still on the table. And I don't know if that's wise because it keeps breaking down and breaking down and breaking down, but there's just something about the setup here. Maybe it's because there's a lack of consistent selling volume. Like it's selling, but it's weak. Maybe because we haven't had that golden cross yet. I think it's down here. We're like right above it. Maybe it's because Roaring Kitty went red. I think his position is red now. But I think on the whole, it's probably just this. Like I don't feel threatened yet because I don't see how this is necessarily like doomsday on the market on the whole. It just looks like a pullback. Yeah, like there's parts of it that I don't like. I don't like being red. Obviously, I wanted Tuesday to be an up day. We talked about that last week. And maybe that means there's a market shift and we need to adapt. But for now, I'm kind of just like, you know, I wonder. Because I'm seeing like high volume selling right now, like across the market and certain stocks. And then other stocks, it just looks like pretty pitiful. So on the 10-minute, this looks like it's kind of rejecting, which would indicate that you're probably going to bottom out here. And this could take a while. I mean, I would prefer not to do that, but you got to get across this one. So I'll make it like yellow or something. Yeah, so this is going to be the first creek cross that we have on IWM. So I think the reason why I'm kind of excited is because everything's really low. And I'm not saying like that's a great thing to be really low, but everything feels like it's at the bottom. And you're either going to make or break on the next big move. And so if the market turns back to the upside, it's going to rip the faces off of some shorts. Also, I had talked about this a little bit, and I don't know if I did it on stream. So if I didn't do it on stream, like I apologize because I don't remember if I did it on stream. I did post this in the Discord group yesterday. So the thought occurred to me that this pattern that's built out here has a lot of reminiscence of like a larger spring setup. So you've got these kind of build outs that like kind of, we'll call it a hook, where they kind of like hook up to the upside and then they drop and they hook up to the upside and they drop. And I'm looking at this like, well, what if you did the same thing here across the bottom that was made? Would it get you through, you know, to make a lower low? And I don't necessarily think it does make a lower low. And that's kind of important because if it doesn't make a lower low, then that's kind of like your last flush and you've now made a higher low. But even if it did make a lower low, it's kind of like, who cares at this point? Because if you're just trying to flush the stock for a spring action, there could still be a larger spring action here because this could just be a buy up that then drops it. So anyways, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, like yesterday as I'm charting, I wonder if I misread it, you know, because it could just be like a giant hook and you're just going to nose dive. But then I was like, you know, at the same time, if I'm setting up any kind of a movement like this, I always talk about how you would drive the price up before driving it back down. And it's interesting to me because this price drove up, but it didn't go higher just yet. And each of these in sequence has kind of dropped the price. I wouldn't say it's a perfect 50-50 kind of setup. But you can kind of see like that S-curve down. So you drive the price up and then you kind of S-curve back down. And they're pretty close to 50-50. Why am I talking about IW or why am I talking about MPW? Well, I don't know why I've been like so on this stock so much. But I found out yesterday that apparently MPW has like a 30 some odd percent short interest. Like it's over 30%. It has a ridiculously high short interest. And what that means is that there's a lot of bears in this stock still. And then I found that there's a ton of people that bought in Q4, which means this is a very, very, very strong squeeze candidate. I did not know that, by the way. All I did was look at the valuation charts for it, and I was like, oh, this is way undervalued. And then I did a bunch of other analysis on it. So if you like short squeeze plays, this is a dangerous one, but it absolutely could be a big short squeeze play. So right now, it looks like it's about to drop off the face of the earth. Like it just has that vibe to it where it's like, well, that's it. You know, it broke down. It's going beneath the bottom. See you later, alligator. We're never going to see it again. It's about to drop and just start going free fall. But then I'm looking at this RSI build out and I'm like, I don't know, man. That to me looks like a buy-in, you know, like increased buying pressure throughout the bottom here. Really gentle buying pressure that just doesn't break you out. It's like consistent buying pressure that just refuses to go. And then you're getting this pullback on RSI now. And I'm like, yeah, you know, structure-wise, this could be a giant cat ear that's about to free fall. But at the same time, this could be a really strong divergence setting up. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just some kind of a weird... I've said this before and been wrong. So like we need to keep in mind that my gut instinct is not always reliable. But and neither is yours, I guess, for that matter, just to be fair. But it made me wonder. So when we went up here, I was like, well, each of these has been like a 50-50 drop. Where would the 50-50 drop on this be? And it's probable that if you just did it even to the bottom here, which I guess is like right there, 481. I know it sounds a lot like AMC also has a 481 number, that it would be that 472 level, which is right where we're going here. And I didn't want it to drop down. It's not like I wanted it to do that. But again, it's like this has a ridiculously high short interest. There's kind of this low key like concentration buy-in here over time. It's increasing, you know, as it goes down. I'm finding it to be a very attractive looking play right now. And I'm wondering what happens here if we do get a spring or if we just kind of bounce and go. And I'm watching IWM and I'm just feeling like this dip is definitely a fear-based dip. Like everything looks like it's sliding too far. And you guys are like, well, that just means it's breaking down, Buxy. You should just take it for as it is. You're right. But I don't know why I can't do it. I think I'm just delusional. I mean, look, everything right now in terms of this setup looks kind of meh. You know, like AMC's already like long forgotten a lot of its trends. It's having some trouble finding a bottom here. It looks kind of whatever, you know, like, well, maybe it just starts again and you just get this big sell-off. And GME is the same way. It's like, it just won't break out, you know. Everything's just kind of waiting. There's nothing moving. And then I'm looking over here at IWM, and I'm like, well, the Russell's just kind of chopping. It's doing its M thing. But there's nothing here that makes me feel like this is the one specifically where I feel like, oh, it's going to just somehow tank right this second. I don't know. I think people have it wrong. Like, I think it's overblown. Like, the bearish sentiment is just overblown. You know? Like, our whole deal with inflation is just getting completely blown out of proportion. You know? There's been nothing but improvement since 2022. I mean, like, nothing has gotten worse. Like, it's all been steadily improving. And this concept of like, oh no, we got like, we're not going to get a rate cut here, we're not going to get a rate cut there, or this or that, or something comes back and it's not moving the way you want it to move. It's like, that's not as important as increases, or that's not as important as percentage change over time. And the percentage changes have been dropping in terms of inflation, like consistently since 2022. And that's what the Fed keeps harping on, is like, well, look, we're trying to get it to a certain number, but it's stagnating, and that's why people are like, well, it's not dropping fast enough. It's like, well, yeah, but if you look at where it was in 2022, it's been nothing but improvement. It's just that it's not moving like at the speed that people thought it was going to move, I guess, or that they originally were saying. And then you've got pricing for consumer prices, and those all feel really high. So people are like, well, those are still high, so it's bad. So they have a lot of uncertainty about the economy. And I feel like uncertainty is where bull markets start. They always start with kind of an uncertainty, like things aren't going quite right. I don't think they've corrected enough. I don't think it's good enough. We haven't had enough dips. I don't feel like it's ready to go. All that kind of stuff you hear always. You always hear that. There's just always a skepticism before a real bull market can really go. And some of you guys are like, well, where have you been, Booksy, the last year? SPY's been ripping. Yeah, but there's still like a huge amount of negative sentiment. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in the market. And I'm not trying to be like a perma bull here, but I've already talked about how like the SPY went sideways for a year, like over a year, and it was a really huge correction. And so this concept of like, oh, it can't run any farther, like that doesn't make sense to me. I just don't get it. But also with IWM, it's never even taken off. It still hasn't left its SOS. It's been just chopping. And I'm like, dude, if this thing goes, it's going to go. You talk about the S&P, but IWM hasn't even had its turn yet. We're easily going to get another all-time high here on the small caps if this thing breaks out. Like, it's going to happen. So I'm looking at it like big picture, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get where people are coming from in some ways, but in other ways, I just don't get it. It feels like a lot of fear as opposed to like, oh, well, generally this doesn't look that bad, it looks pretty good. With all due respect, they've taken a lot of metrics out to make those numbers look better. I don't know if you can do that much to cook the books that way. The data that is being presented is data that you can access from long time ago. So, and it's not like they cooked the books when it was breaking to new highs. I'm not saying that there's not some of that going on, but that's what I'm trying to say. Like, that's skepticism. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I'm not trying to use you as a point in case, right? That there's so much skepticism. People don't believe it. They don't believe it. So they keep thinking that it's really worse than it looks, and it's bad. And that's the kind of stuff that bull markets are almost always built on. I'm just saying. Sometimes people are going to say like, well, man, that might be true, but what about these times where things look too good to be true? And that's usually when you get those, maybe you get those bear markets, but like the idea of skepticism, the idea of uncertainty, like we don't trust the market moves that are happening. That's exactly what I'm talking about. People don't trust the market moves that are happening. People are still bearish on it. People don't trust the data. There's skepticism. But if you look at the historical data, again, like 2022 to now, it's done nothing but improve. And then if you go back in time, that data IWM ruined Ant's Trade's YouTube career. He called for IWM to explode for like 4 weeks in a row. Nothing happened. He got shamed off YouTube. All right. Well, first of all, cancel culture is a bunch of BS. It's a bunch of children, essentially, Generation Z usually, who don't know how to actually deal with things not going their way. So they decide to shame somebody else because they have such low self-esteem themselves. I don't know what else to say. I'm not saying everybody in Gen Z is like that, but it's definitely the trend. So I'm not for cancel culture. I don't think anybody should be shamed for getting their TA wrong. And I'm not just saying that to cover my own butt. I think it's just stupid and immature. And the idea that we are totally cool with like troll cancel culture and all that crap, just BS. It's nonsense. Like civilization wasn't built on the internet. It was built for 10,000 years. You know what I mean? Like there's always been people who are mockers and scoffers, but that's never been like good. We've never seen that as virtuous. And then it seems like nowadays it seems like social justice to people is like ripping people apart for their mistakes. That's not social justice. That's just judgment and bitterness and ego, frankly, on the other side. So first of all, I'm not for that. Second of all, I don't think he's wrong. But I think that his picture of the way things happen is different than the way I would picture things happening. Like, did I think that it was possible that we got to move up here after FOMC? Yes. If you go back and you look a couple months ago, probably my chart looked like this. I'm guessing. It probably looked like this. Actually, I think I had it chopping down pretty low, but I think I had it going like that, right? So something like that where I thought, we're going to chop down into FOMC. I couldn't have said that more if I wanted to. So like, there's no doubt in my mind that we were going to chop down into FOMC. There was absolutely zero doubt in my mind. There was a gap fill here that needed to happen. I figured we'd probably come back, check the moving averages. There were levels that we'd never checked here. I said the same exact thing for AMC and GME, right? Like, I think we're going to chop down into FOMC. What did AMC and GME do? They went and had some weird bullish run in the middle, and then they chopped down. You know, like, that was the only thing that was really different, was that there was this weird giant pop in the middle that looks kind of distributive, right? And then you sell down, you know, again, going into like the FOMC days and then beyond. So in terms of like the price action on IWM, the idea of a chop down before a push is absolutely totally okay. Now, the weirdest thing that happened was this bizarre, gigantic gap up, right? Because of that data that came in, the CPI data that was so good. And that's the only thing here that was kind of like, well, that's weird. You know, that's strange. That really wasn't expected. Like, how do you reconcile that? Does that change the chart? Does that change the direction of the chart? And it takes time to digest those things and also to see how it turns out, because you can't just make a snap judgment that now it's going to just dump all the way down. You got to see if it can make a bottom, because this could just be like a flush. You don't know. But for him to go out and say, like, I think IWM's going to rip, the small caps are going to rip, and that's where we're going to see the moves happen on AMC and GME, like, I'm not saying anything different. So to me, like, and he doesn't even like me, and everybody on his channel doesn't like me, apparently. This is what I've heard, though I don't know if I put a lot of credit to hearsay. I don't put a lot of credit to hearsay. But a lot of those folks don't even like me, but I generally agree, like, that this is kind of the way that it would happen. But after going back and watching that move, I went back and reevaluated the chart, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's a big setup. This could take a while. And it could be, again, built out to get you into a November election period. It's not that weird to think about. So how much time we have between now and November? We have several months. So it's like, there's no rush here to somehow just like break out and rip all the way to the top immediately. And that's what everybody wants. But I'm not advocating for that. And I don't think that this happens and AMC and GME just sit still or just crash. So like, I completely would agree with him that in general, yeah, I don't think AMC and GME are going to have the big move until everything in the market's ready to go in that regard. And that's a little unusual, perhaps, because we want to think that AMC and GME are like special darlings that, you know, do whatever they want to do. But I don't think that the market's ready for it. I don't think they're necessarily just going to rip. we've seen it sometimes. Yeah, you get some kind of weird reversal, maybe with SPY or something, or we might watch the Bitcoin or the crypto market do something, and then immediately afterwards, and there seems to be this rotation of liquidity. Those kind of cycles do happen in the market, and I'm not trying to negate that if someone else is looking at that and they're saying, well, I think it's going to do this and it's going to be inverted to this or that. That's fine. Those are different opinions, different ways of looking at the market. But I think this concept right here, that you have to have a breakout in the small caps, is not that unusual to me. Like, I think that's a fair assessment. So maybe he mistimed it, and that's not something that I can judge, but I don't think anybody should get shamed. Even somebody that considers me their enemy or something, I don't think they should be shamed. He's still a human being. He deserves respect. I don't have to like his TA to know that he still deserves respect. So I don't feel like that's appropriate. And I'm sorry for him. I don't think that's right. But I'm looking at it well, at this point, everything looks like it's flushing. It looks kind of bad. It looks like a dip that's going to end all dips. You feel the pressure. You're feeling the fear. It definitely looks like this could be gearing up on AMC to just go for that gap fill, right? On GME, it's already kind of pushing low. It's going to try to make a new low below 2274. All this stuff feels kind of bad, and I would give you that. But at the same time, I'm looking at this well, your indicators are almost all cooled off. The last time we were this cool on RSI was at the bottom at 18. So for what it's worth, that's a divergence. Price has clearly increased quite a bit. RSI is resetting. I don't know. This doesn't look horrible to me. I think there's parts of this that maybe feel really bad. Obviously finding out that somebody like Roaring Kitty's in the red, you're well, did he make the right call? I don't know. Do you think he's ever been red before? That's my question. Yeah, of course he has. The guy was silent for 3 years. I'm pretty sure he made a lot of money during that time, because he obviously had a lot when he came back. But do I think he ever went into the red here and there? Sure. Right now, people are going to be screaming for $20. It's going to happen. Here we go. $20. I don't know, man. That's the very kind of stuff that you hear right before the market turns. It just reminds me of that October bottom on SPY, from years back, when everyone's super bearish and they're the options are loaded, retail's prepared for downside, there's so many puts now and everybody's ready, and you're well, that doesn't sound quite right. And then the next day it's just ripping and you never go back down again, and it's well, there you go, retail was so right about that. Get real, Booksy. Look, there's problems here, okay? If we were going to be realistic about it, we have to address the elephants in the room. And there are elephants in the room. So one of those things is that this particular move to the upside, I don't feel like there's a whole lot bad about it in the regard of I'm going to remove this for just a minute. You can see better. I don't think there's a lot bad about it in regards to the high, because it didn't come up and push and make a higher high. So it looks safe to me. So this could just be a phase B bottom, basically, an auto reaction. And I know you're well, that doesn't make sense. Shouldn't the phase B come over the top? It just depends on the setup, right? And in this case, I don't really want it to have some kind of an up thrust and then drive all the way back down. But it didn't do that. So we made a lower low, and I'm all right, and then what? Well, now you look at your main indicators and you say, well, what's happening on your indicators? Did they have room to go down? Yeah, they've got more room to go down now. So that could be an argument, well, maybe they pumped it so that there's a cool off and you got more room to dive low. But they're also setting up in a divergence. So your RSI is turned up and the price is still low and down, especially on this bottom. So I'm not of the opinion that it's all great, but I'm also not the opinion that it's all that bad. And we talked about the quadruple flush quite a bit for AMC. This doesn't quite look like it, but we'll have to zoom in a little more to see better. Yeah. That's a hooking action here, right there. So we'll keep that one in mind. It looks like this is as well. They might even be pointing. This is a weird one. This is a really bizarre setup. Yeah. So this looks a little worse on 6 minute because you're seeing like the push up, even though again it doesn't go higher, it's very close to the same price, and then this is a much higher RSI. So it's like they're giving you a lot more space to head back down to the downside. So again, maybe gearing up for that drop. But otherwise, it just kind of looks like a normal cross to me. Kind of reminds me of the shallow S curve, actually. In which case, your sell down level is like here at 450. We'll see. I think what I'm most interested in today is IWM. I want to see if IWM forms out a bottom. And if it does, I think it's going to change the way the market looks all of a sudden. And you know, take it to the bank if you want. Ignore me if you want. You're more than welcome to come back in a couple days and rub it in my face if I'm wrong, if that's what you want to do. But I think that there's that's one way to live your life. I think there's a precedence here for something big to happen. Historically, the election year is like the second strongest of the 4-year cycle. So it's actually not usually the strongest of them. It's usually the second strongest. Some bigger statistics have to do with the sideways action we experienced on SPY. It's really only happened like 14 times in the history of the S&P, and that's not a lot, but 13 out of 14 times. It's been higher the next year. Like it's continued the bullish run at least a year. So there's a lot of positive statistics you could look at. There's some that are maybe more negative, you know. Like you can always make an argument both ways. What I was talking about early in the stream was sentiment, and I think that the sentiment's still relatively negative. Like people don't trust the market moves, people don't trust the data, and that typically, especially right now, looking at the small caps, that's typically like a good sign. The skepticism is good. You have to remember that, like, that's, I don't want to call them bottom feeders, but like the whole idea of institutional trading is like bottom feeding. I mean, they're literally, especially on the bull side, as opposed to the top, right? They're literally like making the fear work for them. The more negative news you have, the more likely you are to paper hand, and the more likely you are to sell into the strong hands. And like, so if you're gearing up for a bigger move to the upside, the best thing you can do is have a lot of negativity and a lot of skepticism in the market. It allows for controlled sell-offs, and then all you have to do is then buy in without pushing the price too high. And you've successfully created an environment of fear where retail is selling their shares into, call it composite operators, right? But the operators' hands. Because retail's like, this is it. We're going to drop. We're dead. We're not going to go. we're going to drop there and we're going to keep dropping. We've broken certain trends. It's over kind of thing. Hey, listen, there's some times where that's clearly like a problem, right? So like, and I'm mentioning like there's a elephant in the room kind of situation. You can't just sit there and say all is peachy keen when it broke certain levels that you didn't want it to break. So like AMC, I didn't want it to come below 460s. Like I didn't want it to drop beneath that 455 level. That happened, right? Once that happens, you step back and you say, okay, well, take a deep breath, reevaluate. How does that change the setup? You know, and the main thing here is that it just puts us farther away from the creek. So it gives you an opportunity to trade sideways, should you desire to trade sideways, before doing anything else. So the biggest problem with that drop in the short term is that it gives you time. As a retail trader, if you're trading options or whatever, that could seriously mess you up because you're like, well, what if my options expire this week and it doesn't move? Well, that's a possibility because they've generated enough space here that there's no rush. Like price action down equals time to the right, especially when you're talking about creeks. But there's also sort of a duality to it because while there is a trend here that clearly represents a creek of sorts, there's also a creek that was very clearly like pushing down, you know. So there's this pressurized kind of move that's very parabolic here, especially on like AMC. And if I think about the creek, it's easy for me to get really hung up on lines. Like, well, that's where the highs were, and now it's making lower highs. So, you know, but you got to remember, like, the creek is flexible. So as much as I want to say, like, okay, so basically what you're saying, Booksy, is that the creek is really far, so now we got all this time. But what about all this bit in the middle? Does that matter? Is it just distancing itself? Is that all there is to it? I'm just answering my own question. Well, no, because you'll notice that as this dropped lower, there's an acceleration of those creeks. Like, so you get this fanning action, right, on the way down. And we've already jumped over like two of them. One was right here on Monday, and then the second actually was kind of the end of the day, Monday, we came across, and then moving into Tuesday, we've also jumped another one. So you're kind of moving across this fan-like motion. And ultimately, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to reverse, but it does in some ways indicate that the creek itself did get pulled down, and we're now facing resistance earlier, and we're repressing it outward. So conceptually, it's not inappropriate to say that your creek is probably more or less like this, right? By the time we get down here, that it's been managed to be pushed down. And then as you're going outward, you're kind of raising it out, right? And sort of re-straightening it out. And at some point, and I can't draw it very easily, at some point you might even say that it's a kind of like an S, right? So you're now able to jump the creek much lower in some regards. So if you can build up momentum here, this is what I'm trying to get at. If you can build up momentum here, the creek might seem like it's way over here, and that could be, again, part of the range build out. It's like you're going sideways. But if you to build up any kind of momentum and break over like 460 at this point, which is the previous bottom, you've got a pretty strong chance of pushing the outer trend because the creek has actually been brought lower. It's better to think about it like a moving average than just a straight line, because that's what it is. It's not like a fixed trend. That doesn't mean you're not going to interact with the trend. You probably will still interact with this trend. That's why I keep it on the chart. But the movement itself is a little bit more like an S here than it is just like a straight line. Which means that at this point, I think if you break back above like 460s and hold, you'd probably be in really good shape. That's not that far off. That's 20 cents. Look at the volume. Look how low the volume is. Even in this sell down, the volume is really, really low. So imagine having high short interest, having low selling volume, very little buyers, or it seems like very little buyers. It's not going to take much to push it back up. So the way this is building out, to me, it looks like a, it looks like a shallow S-curve to me. And then check out the RSI on the 6 minute. It's kind of interesting. Notice the cross happening on that build out. It's kind of hard to deny. So most of that dominant downward motion happened right here. But then look, we're going lower, RSI is coming up, and it's crossing over like the major downtrend, the major downward creek on the buying and the selling. Even if I were to be a little more conservative about it, you would still say, yeah, that's pretty much what it looks like. So I think it looks good. Yeah, I'm going to put a question mark on that Nacho Dip thing. That way it's not like as bearish. Right? You're like, what are you looking for here, Bugsy? What do you want? Here's what I want to see. I want to see a build out reaction here as IWM makes its bottom. I want to see everything else kind of start finishing off whatever downside needs to happen. Maybe it's a gap fill, maybe it's just a lower low, maybe it's some kind of a major spring action. And then as we move up, probably in the end of the day today and tomorrow, I want to see that reaction take place. And I think if it's successful, and I know I'm kind of shooting in the dark here, but I believe if it's successful based on what I'm seeing on this setup, that we're going to get a really nice build out. It's definitely filling the gap. Well, it definitely looks like it wants to. So there we're going for it, right? So I think the gap is at 435. And, you know, when you say like, again, like where's the downward creek cross going? I mean, I have it on the chart, so I left it on here. It might even be a little outward. It's like right there. So this is clearly like the aim for this move. You know, it's a 50-50 kind of swing. So you pump up, and then you drop 50, and then you drop another 50%. And this is pretty typical for a AMC kind of move to the downside to get you below a chart level. The good thing about it, and I mentioned it yesterday, is that even if this drops, this didn't come above the high, which is actually a positive sign. It gives you a pathway back to the upside very quickly. It may seem really negative, I get it, and it certainly, you know, allows for a lot more time. So if there's an opportunity to build out time-wise, that can obviously put a damper in your plans. But I'm not sure. Like, I don't know how you can get through all this without some kind of reaction back to the upside. That's kind of where I'm gonna park, I suppose, my thoughts. Someone asked me about the 6 minute. All right, so this is a weird thing that I don't know, I guess you could say I found it, but it was more trial and error than anything else. So when I went in to do I did like an automated trading plan kind of thing where it builds out like trading indicators based on RSI. And I found that using a slightly tighter time frame, and using like the indicators of 33 and 67, so 3 in from the bottom, 3 in from the top, in conjunction with a 6 minute, gave me a much more dependable turnaround. So that means that like if it can hit that marker and pass above it and then back below it, it's a stronger indication that the chart's going to actually turn. It's not perfect. No indicator is perfect. But in terms of a percentage, it's the highest percentage that I could find. So it was better than 5 minutes, better than 7 minute, better than 8 minute, better than 4 minute, 3 minute, you name it. Is better than everything. So in a range, I believe that the 6 minute is dominant. The 6 minute and a rebreak over 33 or under 67, it gives you like a 73% success rate, which is the highest that I could find. So I think it's probably the best indication of turns on the short term. Obviously that doesn't apply to the big picture, but I hope that goes without saying. So it's not just because, oh, it's 6 minute, I just want to be different or something. No, I mean, if 5 minute were better, I would have picked 5 minute, but it wasn't better. The best I could get it to on 5 minute was like 60%. But for some reason on the 6 minute, it's just a more reliable indicator. I guess because it's giving you an extra minute of time. And so it's the calculations are, for whatever reason, that extra minute gives you that little extra boost. And then when you get up to 7 minute, the percentages start going back down again. So it's like, again, it was like 60%. So I just started using the 6 minute. I find it to be really reliable for short-term moves. Again, it's not perfect. There's times where it doesn't quite reach the marker you want it to reach, but it's definitely a dominant time frame in RSI in sideways ranges. It's the dominant one, in my opinion, just based on the mathematics behind it. So, but you have to set it up right. I think the only difference was that I used, and I don't know if I actually did it on this chart. The only difference was I used the 14 instead of, I think it comes default with 18. If you set up RSI sometimes. So that's like how many blocks it's counting, how many candles basically. So the RSI length is 14. And then using the 6 minute with 14 length. And then if you use the 33 and the 67 as part of an indication of breakout and whatever, it's like an open and close type calculation. So if it opens and then underneath it and then it has a close above it, it calculates based on that. So you might get multiple buy signals from it if you did that. But once you get to the buy signal, like there's like a 10 and a 30 buy signal. Once you get to like both of those, it's almost always ready to turn. So it's a little more nuanced than just like, oh, I like 6 minute because it's good, and it is good. But if you were using it as a trading indicator, you'd want to adjust your settings appropriately. You wouldn't just buy every single one of these lows. Granted, if you had, you could have taken advantage of every one of these little pops, but some of them have been much more successful than others. And then as it got low, it never goes back above the top. So that's a problem, right? So your indicator wouldn't have ever given you like a sell signal, and that could have really screwed you, right? So you'd have to be careful. $6.5 minutes. No. I tried, I don't know if you can do 6.5 minutes. Maybe you can. Like I said, it wasn't really that complex. It's more just the nature of the statistical likelihood that it's giving you a successful trading signal. And 6 minute was the best. I tried everything from like 1 to like I think it was like 1 to 15. Just I wanted a low time frame. I wanted to know what was the best low time frame RSI setup. And that's what I found. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe there's a better one, but I tried a lot. Like I tried as much as I possibly could. And this was the best one I found. I mean, there's a reason that people use the defaults because everybody uses them. So if you're just wanting to get kind of an aggregate opinion, the defaults are probably going to be your best choice. But if you have something specific in mind, you should try to figure it out. And that's what I did. So. Alrighty. Well, this doesn't really look like a bottom to me just yet. It looks like it might be gearing up. I mean, it could be a bottom, but it looks more like it's gearing up for a potential final drop here. I might be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. I wonder where this is coming from. Over here? That's a weird trend. Yeah, if IWM drops again, I'm thinking right in this little pocket, like down here, makes sense. And then it looks like you're starting to get more specific on this build out. I should try to be really precise about this. Could just be parallels, but I'm going to do it anyways. Not really having enough information can kind of hurt the trade setup because if you don't have the information you need, then yeah, this looks like parallels. So you can't really draw what you need to draw with any kind of waveform accuracy anyways. So I think these are just parallels down. So I wonder if that's the case. 38. This is probably like the halfway mark here on this wave. And that's probably where these parallels are coming from, is this top to this kind of midpoint right here. You can see that wick. So the wave cross, this would be considered like a trajectory. So if you didn't want to use all of these, you don't have to, but you could think about it like it's wrapping around this, and once it finds support on top of it, probably ends up going. I don't think it's going to happen right this second, but that's where I'm at. That's sort of common sense after that, I suppose. There it is again. So a bit of a downtrend. And this is the middle, roughly. That seems right to me. It's a little, maybe it's a little bit steeper than this previous one. So that could indicate that bears are getting a little more feisty here. Like you don't have as much buying pressure, and so bears are trying to like push the stock down even more than they were previously over here. Makes sense because it went higher, but it's still like a little steeper. We're moving away from that trajectory, but that might actually be a good thing because sometimes if you move away from it, sometimes if it can find that bottom, you get a bigger move up on like a slingshot. It may be quite nice. What else could we do here that might help? I want to build it out as best I can. So right now I think there's downward pressure going through this channel. I mean, it could be the end of it if it's just a 1, 2, 3, but I think there's going to be one more move down. It seems likely. So if this is the 3, this is the big one, and then you'd have another one down. That's about the same as the first. Just again, on average. Yeah, so it makes sense. It would basically bring you down to the potentially to bring you down to that 199.30 level, which is just the bottom of that trend. So there's nothing really fancy about that. And then my guess is that there's a creek here at the gap, right on the gap. So if you did drop, you could land like right in this pocket. It's pretty straightforward. Triangulation. There's nothing really to that. And I don't know if it's a 50% or not, but we could check. It's pretty close. The 50% is actually a little bit lower. It's like here. It just depends on what point you use, though. If I use the lower one, it probably looks more like the first. So if I use this lower build out, or even this side, it might be even better to use that one because this is an up thrust. Yeah, I think that's actually better. Trying to get it right. It's hard to do this. I guess I could use that other tool. I just don't ever, I always forget to use it. There it is. It's this one. Instead of the measurement tool. And then you have a way of kind of calculating the build out. So what's the correct way to chart a downward Elliot? Elliot waves are kind of tricky because they have layers, so they have iterations. So you could start a downward Elliot from here and assume that it has to be some kind of massive 1, 2, 3, or you could, but if you do that, you know, and you're wrong, then what do you do next? You know, so there's different Elliott wave setups. Some of them are just giant wedges. There's an Elliott wave wedge. So you might be playing out like a sideways chopping action that hasn't quite completed yet. So the hardest part about Elliott for me always has been, okay, if it hits the right fib levels, do I just assume that it's going to continue like an impulse? But there are a number of other Elliott wave setups. It's not just impulse waves. And then there's impulse waves that are not impulse waves. Then there's like sort of sideways chop waves that are, I mean, like I said, so it's not as simple as everything's just kind of A, B, C, D, E, you know, though that does happen. So what I would probably do is look at, and I don't know how you could do this. I don't feel like that's I think that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave. And I think it's a corrective move from this. This is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That might be it. Like I said, it could be a build out in a much larger setup. So then this would be like an ABC kind of correction, but I'm not really sure. I think that would be the best way to read it. So you would start here then at the top. That would be the way I would do it. But I'm really not the best at doing Elliott. So probably do this. So when it makes a new low, that's when the next wave would technically start. So here's a problem with this. So if I go down and I do this and I say that's the last wave, well, wave 4 is not supposed to come back below. I mean, I could be wrong. Hang on. I don't think it's supposed to come back below 1. I don't think that's a thing. So it can't be a wave 4. This is where I'm going to fail you because I'd have to look up the rules. But I'm pretty sure that wave 4 doesn't pass below wave 1. It just does. It's not supposed to. So you'd have to say like maybe this is all part of a 3 or it's just an ABC correction. You know? So it's complicated. Meaning this is like 1, 2, and then 3. But it hasn't actually made a lower low yet. So that's why I'm saying, like, I don't know if this is an easy enough To me, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but 4 shouldn't go back above 1. So that doesn't really work. I would read it more just like a wedge, to be honest, and just go from there. I mean, and that's probably the best way, I think, to read it. Yeah, I don't know. That one's tough. I'm not very great with Elliot. I think that because Elliot Wave does take into consideration what we would call iteration, meaning like there's larger build-outs within there's smaller build-outs within larger build-outs. You have to first have an idea of what the larger build-out is, because you can't easily define the smaller one if you don't see what the larger picture might be doing. So on the larger picture, could this still just be in a wedging action? Well, my answer is yeah. I mean, it could be. We can define like this however we want to define it, I guess. But to me, like this could still be a pretty good loose wedge. So you can use the trends if you want to use them for like points of impact. But the big thing with Elliot is the levels. So like 2 usually is a really deep wave, but once you get to 3, which is big, it can't come back below 1. So this one ends up usually being pretty mild. And then 5 ends up being a lot more like level 1, whatever the first one was. That's kind of it. And then the rules about it are about fib extensions. Usually you get a 618 fib extension on 3 or something like that. I mean, and then how far they retrace can determine the strength of the move. You know, like a lower retrace or a 50% retrace, I think on the first one or the second one, something like that, indicates like a better move. You need to look up the rules though. I don't want to misquote it. But that's the big way you would do it. It's not so much about being a perfect trend, although sometimes it happens to be a perfect trend. It's more about the levels it's hitting, like fib levels. Because sometimes it's not a trend at all. Sometimes it's like a parabolic motion, you know. What I'm using right here is actually a GAN fan, which is kind of strange, but I noticed that in the original GME run-up, it tracked pretty correctly across a GAN, and so I was looking at it thinking like, well, where is that marker? Where would a 50% be on this move? And yeah, and not looking at the middle of the wave, it would be way out here, which is kind of strange. But based on the way this is set up, there's only 2 ways to draw it. You can draw it here, or you can draw it to this other wick here. Interestingly, and you'll see immediately what just happened, is that no matter which way I draw it, the exits over here kind of stay the same. These fib levels basically are the same areas, like same pocket right here. They don't really change much, but the ones in the beginning change quite a bit. So if I draw it where the 1/8 over here is, this is again using GAN, so it's like fibs but a little different. Notice that we're right on the 1 right now. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's really important. But it's not the low, so I drew it over here because technically this is the low. So I think it gives you a better structure for the outward move. But if I'm just looking at distance across, like in terms of a fan, this is a really, really good measurement because this is showing you like essentially like a perfect, it's an angled thing, right? These things don't always work out, but it's basically a perfect move from the 1/8 to the 1. We're right there. Pretty cool. I don't know exactly how I'm going to use this yet, but I'm trying it out. If it works out, I'm going to try to use it more. Because I think what it might do is give you a healthy way of measuring these waves as they come out, you know. And it makes sense to me that there would be some kind of an equalized measurement here. bottom to top, because we've been doing this for a while, like where I'll take like a top and I'll go down and be like, all right, where's the 50%? Because that to me indicates that's where the waveform crosses. Usually, if you did it right, the 50% ends up being right along that previous bottom that's set up. In this case, it's going beyond it, so it looks like it's overstretched a little bit. The previous low here was really close to being perfect. Now you take it a step further, you're like, well, now it's made a new low over here. Now it looks lower. But you would take that into consideration because like reactively, it's now pushing farther than you expected. And therefore, potentially, if it reverses and you can get that jump, I mean, just look at the RSI here on the 1 hour, like boiling downward. If you can get that jump, I think you're looking at a really strong reaction. It's like everything's kind of trying to like press it down to get it low. And I look at the major structure and it makes sense to me because on the major structure, there's not been a check down here, right? On this like kind of larger cross. So anyways, the build out to me should be mathematically sound. It doesn't mean that you're right. It just means that depending on where this bottom is, I think it's a good way of indicating the middle of the wave. And that should give you a trajectory out. And maybe another way to do this would be to use this in reverse. So if you had the opportunity, people get really distracted by like the rainbow colors, but I think they're cool, so I'm going to keep them on there. The other way to do it would be to sort of take it the other way and use the GAN basically like in reverse, right? And you would try to find like, again, where's that 50% marker? Well, I already mentioned it earlier, but it seemed like this first one was a lot closer to being correct. And it looks like it's kind of pushed out of it. So what instead I might have to do is kind of take this and use it. I don't know if we can go that flat, but maybe that's wise. I don't know. And this doesn't have every level under the sun. Like if I do a Fibonacci fan, it allows you to add more to it. This one by default only goes to 1/8 and 8/1. So like that's as far as it's going to go. But if you use like a pitch fan, you can have them extend almost straight up and straight out, like a perfect right angle. It works. So anywho, so yeah, if I were doing this the other way, you find that that actually ends up being the same line. You see that? So why does that work? Because math. Because it's all sine waves. So like you're getting an equal parts measurement. So the fact that this bottom to this top on the outer one gives you that halfway mark, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's just the mathematics behind the move, right? So when we identify these midlines, when we identify these sine wave crosses, we're doing it knowing that the equal parts builds out a larger structure as long as it meets certain criteria, right? And the criteria right now is breaking out of this trend here, which, you know, on the opposite side just so happens to be like right where the 1 is. So it's like you're getting this really strong move because you're basically now going across the other half of this wave build out and you're returning back to this wave. So you can see like the massive swing and how it builds out. I know it's like the double rainbow thing hurts your brain, but just keep it simple. I don't always make this too complicated. Like you can see why if it were to break here, you would probably return pretty far up, at least to like maybe this 4-1 level. Potentially. I guess if you were being really like bearish about it, you would say like, well, I don't think it has to go that far. I think it could go to here, you know, to this like 29 pocket, which also is a place that we've had support and resistance. So you could say maybe it only ever advances back to 2-1 and 2-1 or even lower, you know, and then you can look at each of these. Probably these fans are all being respected as well. I haven't particularly taken any effort to like sit here and examine it. I just drew the one on the bottom, but you can tell that they're being fairly respected. Those are the fan lines, and I draw those anyways. So like the stuff that I'm doing normally is just the same thing. I'm just picking out the ones I want to pick out. I don't use the whole fan. So what if it doesn't work? Well, then you can go back and just look at the bigger picture, and you'd have to say, well, maybe there's something else going on. We could do the same thing here and just see what's happening. I haven't done this yet. I suppose, depending on how you do it, I mean, I don't know, maybe like that. Maybe that's one way to do it, or you can do it where it goes to the low, like over here. Notice that that gives you that move up to 1. So you see that right here? So going from the bottom on 1.8 all the way back up to 1, that's a really common move. We did the same thing right here. We went from 1.8 up to 1. You know, well, we actually went from 1.8 up to 1/2, and now we're going over to 1 again. So it's kind of cool because obviously the fan itself is just a series of trajectories. You know, they're mathematically spaced, but what's cool about it is when you see that in combination with sine waves and the creaks that we talk about, it's kind of easy to see how all that builds out. And I'd have to kind of go back and examine some examples in order for me to get an idea of like what's a patterned break on GME look like. Like how does this normally navigate these levels? And I'm not always sure. So all right, so GME's broken the new lows, 2274. AMC's gap filled 435. Not particularly confident that we have to stop at the gap fill, but it has reached its creek retest. So we've got another kind of parabolic move down. This is a really steep trend. So if it breaks, I mean, I think it looks enough like a wedge that I would be fair. I think it'd be fair to do a 618 on this. I did it in reverse, so I'm gonna do that again. So back to 448. Seems likely if it can break out of this little outer trend. Back to 448 would be my guess. And that puts us back in the range. So there's a possibility if it can get back to 448 that we stay at 445 and this just becomes like a little terminal action. We have to keep in mind that that's not always the way things go. So we could make a lower low. We could break out and get stuck. That's what I was saying. I'm trying to emphasize the need to see a bottom on the broader market on a day like today with the sell-off. And then with GME, it just broke to a new low, but here, I'll get rid of this. It's kind of confusing. But we're watching to see what happens. I don't know what's going on down here. Not much. Just dipped down and just sitting there. So nothing really happening that's super exciting. I think this represents a really important breakout. We just haven't gotten it yet. I'm just waiting to see it happen. And we're just kind of waltzing along here, but if we can get that break move, and GME is a little different than AMC. It doesn't have to go as far. Really, it only has to go back to like 2360. We may need to find support again on 2320, but that's kind of it. It's very close to where it needs to be. AMC is a little different. It has to kind of travel quite a bit back up and then quite a bit back up again. So at this point, again, you might be wondering, like, is there any hope here? I'm doing a lot of charting on the basis of the setup being bullish, and I haven't really addressed too much the setup being bearish. But the bearish setup here is it's already kind of like playing out in that way, where you're getting like a push down that's breaking to new lows. And ultimately, like if you continue to break new lows and you can't find support at 430, I don't think we're going to go anywhere but like 380. I think we're going to drop hard to 380. But that being said, the reason I've been really optimistic is because I think what we're seeing is like a push down that's kind of like a shrinking. It's been really hard to identify exactly where it is because in this setup, this thing like clearly has that momentum downward, but it hasn't yet formed a bottom. And so it's been tricky to kind of see where I know where the creeks are. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is that, so if you go like to something like March and you look at that breakdown, the structures are really obvious. There's like a giant cat ear on the top, then you got a secondary cat ear, and then you've got another one like in the middle. So they're all very much like there. And on this guy, I haven't really seen, like I'm not as confident about where they are. If I had to make a guess, I would say that, and that's important for measuring out if you do have a reaction. One of them's clearly up here around like 540. That's the easy one because it's at the top. This would be like the first one. This would be your second one. This is all a sell down. I'm thinking this is the next one right here. So if I had to like section it off, and you'll see why this is important in a second if you're kind of like, why does that matter? Because these should be like incremental levels. Like they should be getting you to a particular low, and then as you build back out, you typically find that they're built in a mathematically sound way if it's going to reverse, right? I haven't really been able to identify it yet, so what I'm going to do is clean this up a lot. We get it. We get this. This is like a little tiny wedge here. We can go back and more fine tune it in a minute, but I want to see if I can get the big picture down. And then this is where things get weird because unlike what we saw in that March move, which again, it's just an example that I use because it's easy to see. This one's a little different because it might be here. It should be where that breakdown is. So it might be here and then here. So you can see like right before the upthrust, there's like a chop. That's really like the drop level. The upthrust is just pushing up and then going back down through that drop level. This is where it built out finally and then it makes the move. This is where it builds out here and then it makes the move. And then down low, the reason I started doing this is because of Friday. Because the Friday price action is like hyper iterative. Like it's very, very clear. It's like a copy paste repetition, which is only really ever used, I feel, when they're trying to exhaust the market. And we don't see it very often where it's that clean. So I'm trying to pay attention to it. So I think this one is probably here. That's kind of weird, but this is tricky. This is why I don't like this right now, because I can't really identify it very easily. I can see the hook here, so I think I'm right. I think it's right around this pocket here. I'm going to go a little closer to see if I can more or less like pinpoint it. Because there should be plenty of hits on it. That one, yeah, 480. That makes sense because 41 has been like a major support and resistance. So that's kind of logical. This one I'm not so sure. 520. It could be 520. It could be closer to 522. I guess I'll just say 520 because I'm not sure. All right, so that matters because that would correlate with potentially a bigger build out. I don't really care about these lines. These are just me like eyeballing possibilities. Wait, what was the number that we said on the 618? It was like 440, 48. Yeah, so it's right back to that level. That's weird. Let me double check that. Kind of eyeballing it. Yeah, it's like right on the money. It's like 445. So it takes you right back to that. Here, let me zoom in. So the wedging action takes you right back to, yeah, 448. Now let's try it. I don't even know what to do here. I guess I'll try it from top to bottom. See where that goes. Don't expect it to be the same, but so this actually brings you up to the 618 brings you to 528. So that's close to the 520, but it's not quite the 520. And if I go to the 520, the 618 brings you to 486. So it's a bunch of 618 retraces, each one of these, here to here to here. They look pretty even though when I'm just like visually looking at them. Yeah, they almost look perfectly evenly spaced. They're not though. The bottom is from that midpoint, but not to the top. All right. So the first one's hard because you wouldn't actually go. So that launches you high enough to get over there. And that launches you high enough to get over there to 621. I'm going to go with my original numbers, not with the 618 numbers. So I'm just going to try it with those. Obviously, the bottom changes, the bottom changes. I'm specifically looking for those ears, those drop-offs here, drop-off here, drop-off here. That's what I'm doing right now. So in order for this to be successful, this is exactly what I would expect. So the middle reactive move would have to go over this one. It makes sense because, again, with this build out, if it's a spring, it makes sense because the reactive move would take you back to essentially like the previous high, and you'd have to build support here and then move on up. So you'd basically get like a 50%, and I don't know how high that would go. I'm just going to keep that trend there. I think that's probably the right one, actually, right there. So it gives you like a little halfway point where you can kind of stop, and then you'd have the rest of the way up to the SOS. And then this is where things get kind of weird because this isn't looking like a massive move anymore when you do that. It looks like the next one, now that's not true, Booksy, because in March it went over the top, but then the next move, no, the next move is only 50% up. Dang it, that's $8.94. So basically like $9. What's that $8.94? So what you're saying, Booksy, is we're going to get stuck. I'm not positive. I've gotten a lot of targets. They're not all going to hit. You can just shoot, shotgun it and say that, like, well, if you throw spaghetti at the wall, eventually something sticks, right? That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to find clear, concise targets that make sense. And this one does make sense. 896 seems like a solid target because it's the platform we set up on right at 9 when we hit the top and came back down. As is this one, right? As is the $6 one. It's the second platform. So we've got two targets that look pretty obvious to us. The big thing is like, well, if you 50-50 from here over the top where the SOS might be, so again, 50%, then another 50%, then, so on and so forth. This gets you right up to that. that marker. And then another 50% probably gets us to where we were thinking we were going to go, up to like 15. This is where things get kind of tricky, because you sort of, let's do that. It's not quite right. It's that 18 level. Yeah, I wonder though, maybe we're not going to go all the way up. Maybe we just go to 9. They may not want to go higher right now. I mean, it's there, it's just not, I don't see like a build-up that necessarily takes you out that far. Assuming that this reaction starts and it goes. Nothing's really confirmed yet. Sorry. But first you got to just see the smaller breaks. That's sort of confirmation number 1. And then you can see if the rest of it pans out. So if this range was successful in a build-out, the only thing I thought we might do is jump here and go sideways a bit, but really that could happen still. Like you could see it move up to like 480s and then come down a bit and then go. So timing wise, this isn't necessarily accurate, but in terms of like a build out for the range, if the range has already traded and you've already traded everything there is to trade between, let's say 430 and 584, there's no reason to spend a lot of time. That's why if you do happen to get to like a spring or a last point of support, usually what we find is that after that it just kind of starts going. You might get little LPSs, usually move right up into a SOS. You don't typically waste a lot of time chopping sideways for long periods of time. We already kind of lost the smaller range. Like that to me was like done when they didn't go for the phase B. But the larger range is still playing out. And I'm thinking like, well, at this point, why would you trade anything from here up to about 540? There's no need. And really, this is the only place we've distributed that at 570 that I can think maybe we need to buy in more there, but like that could be just done on like a backup after an SOS. Just this kind of emotion, you know. It'd be easy enough to do that. So what you're saying, Booksy, is there's still a chance. You still think it's going to run into July 4th, even though the markets are red a few days before. I guess that's what I'm saying. I don't know. I can't change it. So, no, I mean, I have the gap at 435, but I can double check. I'll double check for us. You just look at the closing value. Yeah, it closed at 435. That's what it says on TradingView. So I mean, maybe it's wrong on TradingView, but that's what it says. So all I would have to do is hit 435. I think it went down to 434. All right, so that's been hit. That one's done. Let's walk out of here. Let's see it happen. Let's just start taking off. May not have come down low enough, to be honest, but I'm just going to leave it at that. So this first build doesn't give you like a 50% to the top, so it's kind of strange. So what I'm going to do is build out, and this is going to get kind of messy for a minute, but how low did this thing go? I got to make sure I'm right about this. This thing can't just eyeball this. I think it's 434, right? So for now, I'm going to do it from 434. So what I'm going to do is build out 50% markers. It's really clean. This is very nice. So here's what I'm seeing is that each of these, if you go 50-50, is giving you a really simple way of getting above the next high. So I think this could be a very successful build out. Notice that, here I'll just do them one at a time. So notice that this one, if we jump 50% and then we jump another 50%, that you're able to get over the creek. You see that? Now I'm not timing it, I'm just kind of looking at it, but if you went up 50%, you'd be above the creek, period. Like, as long as it goes up there, you're above the creek. It's going to happen. Even right now, like, we'd pretty much go right up, we'd be pushing the creek. So no matter what, that's solid, because that means if you retrace at least 50%, you're going to be above the creek. And then if you go the next 50%, you're in the SOS, because this is like the SOS pocket right here. So this is giving you a really simple way to see how, like, oh, we go back to the middle of the range. That's the next creek. Then you go into the SOS. That's the next creek. I don't know if there's one right here, but that would be the next one up, right? So as long as you could break here, this one might take a minute. Then the next level brings you to the middle. So now it's a 50% move from bottom to top. So if you want to look at it like that, we can do that. That's probably a better way to do it. It's like color code these or something. So the next one, let's do that. You know me and my colors. I'm going to make it purple or something. Oh, shoot. I did that wrong. Oops. Here, I'll do the first one purple. You guys are like, I can't see the difference. Don't worry. We'll see the difference. Then we'll do this next one. Yeah, we'll do the next one green. And then that way you can kind of see them as increments instead of being, that's still like hard to see. Let's make it purple, but make it like lighter, like 4% or something. And then the next one we'll do green, and we'll make this like 4%. So the next 50% move, this is unfortunately not getting you all the way, but this will be your next 50-50 move right here. So this actually gets you above this middle, and it can get you above this major creek. So this is kind of the big one, because it jumps over the major line. So that next reaction move could get you up there. What about the bottom? Where's the floor? Floor's here. Okay, this is pretty close. So it can get you right to where the floor is. And then from there, that's 50% one. Then you go to the next 50%, and that gets you up to the next floor. This one's not quite as clean, unfortunately. I mean, it's there. Yeah, that one's good. So that gets you from floor 1 to floor 2. That's an SOS above the top. And it jumps over the outer creek here. So then you've got that one. So you basically pass over 2 major creek bodies in this guy. This is the big one. This might be the one that has the most pullback because of the setup. It's hard for me to imagine this not chopping quite a bit. Like, we might get some pretty major retracements. And it's just timing. I don't know. Timing's tricky. And then the next one up, we'll make it like blue or something. So I can see it a little bit better. I think the background's already blue. So if you look at the next 50%, this is the same level that we're already at. So naturally, like, that's part of that. I'm kind of ignoring certain things, but yeah, that's right. And then you go up here. I guess this is the one that could have like the bigger drop back down. Me too. And then the last one, these things are weird. This is a weird way to set this up. That is a good one though. And then this one gives you over the SOS here. I I don't know if I can clean this up any better. Well, I mean, obviously we'd like to see this happen. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. A backup here would probably be back to this guy, and then you kind of start all over again. It's the same thing. You just move up to the next one. So each of these is like on point because obviously that's the way I measured it. So it's going to look right. But my concern is, are these levels that you would want to kind of hit on the way out? And the answer is yeah. These are all the levels that you'd want to hit. So now that I know that like mathematically it works, I don't know about the rest of it, right? Because we'd have to see it kind of build back out and then go again. But it could potentially go up to like 15 or so if it can manage to do this backup successfully. This looks really likely to me because if you look at July 2nd, that's the intersection between this 50-50 mark out and this upward trend that I've been using. I think it's the waveform. So if you're looking at this as a waveform, the reason why this makes a lot of sense to me is because notice that the 50-50s right now are getting us back to a waveform on July 2nd, for example. But that's more than just that, because remember, on the big picture, this is where things are hopefully going to click. I hope. On the big picture, this is a wave cross down here. You see this? So you would expect it to come back up and at least try to check the cross down. So this is a big picture movement that, I mean, it's a really good sign if it does work out. So we're using the bottom, and I haven't really messed with this in a while, so we may need to mess with it some, but we're using this bottom move. Look at that, man. This is so ridiculously bullish in my opinion. I don't know. It's hard for me to see this any other way right now, even though I didn't like the breakdown. So this looks like a hot mess, right? 'Cause you can't see what we're doing on the small picture. But this build out could be correct. So let me take a measurement. So let's go back down to 434. Kind of right in the middle of these, isn't it? Or should I go to the low? I don't know. Well, it makes sense to me that this is the middle because we talked about this earlier, but I couldn't tell when I went back and did this the first time. Most of you won't recall, and I don't expect you to recall, but when I did this the first time on this chart, what I was trying to do was identify the most likely wave middle, and these are the two candidates. So unfortunately, there's not really anything else I can do because we don't have any other information right here that gives me another hit. There's probably one that goes like directly down the middle. You can kind of see it. This is really important because if the wave completes here, it's gonna go back up to one of these markers. I'm saying that with a lot of confidence because I'm confident in it. If the wave can complete and we get the push up and all of this happens, you get the fill out like 50, 50, 50, 50%, 50%, 50%. It's getting you right back to these levels that we just broke down from. It's very clean. It was a good setup. It has to confirm. Hasn't confirmed yet. We're waiting. It'll start with a really small move. It'll look unbelievable. It'll look weak probably. And it'll probably push out and then just find some support at like 460. That would be like the first move. And then everything else from that would be kind of a thunderous rolling kind of move. You just start seeing like the bigger and bigger and bigger swings all of a sudden. Because they're not going to waste a lot of time trading here. All of this is like a really controlled walk down. It's super hyper controlled. They're not getting it oversold. They're trading back through the range, just like they traded up through the range here. They're trading back down through the range. So if it works out, it's going to be pretty quick, I think, going back through here. I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time. There's a couple areas I think we might spend more time. But once this creek jump happens, y'all, this is looking really good. So anyways, if that all occurs, my expectation usually is that this makes sense. In this case, it does make sense because the SOS target of, and I'll mark it off because I feel pretty good about it right now, is about 624. That SOS target, if you look at bottom to that, to the top, where does it intersect that top 50%? It's over here on July 2nd. That's not unrealistic. That seems about right to me. But at the same time, it's like looking at this build out, you're like, oh, okay. So that's a place it could reject if we don't have enough momentum. But then if you continue to go, then it looks implied that that might actually be the next hit. I don't know how to qualify that any better, but it looks like you could go right back up to 1876. And that was the 1877 target we had from a while back. Y'all remember that? It's right on that intersection. It's still there. So 1877 is back on the table because, and I actually have it marked off with a date on this chart, which seems kind of embarrassing now because I'm like, okay, well, I don't know why I thought that was so vital. It looks like 1837 here. Wow, that's really clean. Wait, what is this? What is this marker? I'm going to change the color of it and go look. Where did that come from? That's the one. That's the one that we looked at the other day. Because we were saying that if you go back and you look at the January to June move, the June move comes back from that LSPY. It's built out in it. And the same thing applies for all of them. They all have like that mid build out in the big M cross down. And it always ends up pointing to the second top if there's going to be a second top. Oh my gosh. It's like perfect. I can't be right. How is that possible? Y'all are like, the operators know better than you, Booksy. How dare you doubt their efficiency? Yeah, well, I don't like them either, and you shouldn't like them, but whatever. They might be right, because this is like really simple. Like, boop, boop, boop. Okay. That's going to a target that I'd want to go to. And the lower one, not surprisingly, is like the 1380 target. So it's not like it has to hit, but that's good. I didn't think we would go beyond the 15 target. I thought the 15 target was stronger than the 18 target, to be honest. I kind of felt like the 18 target was a little bit weak. But now I'm looking at it and I'm like, no. I'm not so sure it's weak. I think it's really strong. I wish I could describe this more concisely. So this was a completely different methodology to get this target up here. And now I just measured it out with 50% rules and it gets you there. And that's one thing, but it's odd to do that like a few days later and not have that as a. So this is this is starting to look really simple to me. I don't like that feeling because you're like, oh, it's too easy, you know? Can't be that simple. But if I'm right and this goes, could you imagine, like, you can make so much on that move. It'd probably be like one of the last big moves this year going into elections. I mean, I don't know for a fact, but I get the feeling that it's going to chop into elections. AMC anyways. Yeah, I know I'm being a little crazy. But how else can you measure this, Booksy? You have to have something else you can do to check it. You can't just assume anything with the stock market. How else can you check this? Think. There has to be a way to check it. Well, we could do a fan target. I mean, that's something we could do from this bottom. Oh man, this is gonna get messy. Okay, so in theory, if this is a spring bottom and it breaks the creek right now, I'm genuinely serious when I say I think we could see a move at least to 9 and then probably by, I don't know how it could happen that fast, but to July 8th. And I mean this genuinely because I'm like looking at the market like, yeah, I don't know. It's here too. You know, this goes up into the 8th. This goes up into the 8th, y'all. Like, it's the same timing. Imagine the reversal. Imagine the faces of the bears if this thing rockets from here into the 8th. It seems unrealistic, but because you're like, dude, it's never going to happen. We're dying. AMC's a crap stock. But I'm telling you, this looks like totally doable. How do I'm like genuinely kind of like confused because I'm like thinking there's got to be a way to disprove it, right? Just because a setup is there doesn't mean it happens. So that's the first thing I could say. It's like, well, who cares? You know, just because it's set up there doesn't mean it's going to happen. But if it does happen, this is like a really, really clean call out. So how else can I qualify it? I need to be able to do this. I was going to use a fan and then I got distracted by my own musings. Man, it'd be a really great 4th of July if we can get this. Why that one, you might ask. So this is it's just a guess because I'm not positive, but I think this is the right one because I'm pretty sure this is the main cat ear, like the middle cat ear, and you would do like the between the two. I don't think I would use the high here. That doesn't mean it won't hit. It's just that that's just not where I would expect it to go. So, okay, so this trajectory matches. This trajectory matches here. It's pretty close. So actually, those are both the same ones that I would have drawn on the lower one. I just did the same exact thing on the bottom. So I did it down here, right? See that? I drew these two. And it's the same thing right here. You seeing the two that I've marked off? So those are the same. So we're going to keep those two because that's clearly like working. Yeah, and see how these trajectories, when they met, you see how they rocket through them? It's not like they're there to be like necessarily anchors because at first they don't seem to matter that much. But later on, when you look at the build out for the January 2021 move that went into June, when you look at those later on, they build out into the final tops. So at first they're just kind of respected as like a halfway point on a big wave. So you got a wave up, comes back through them, you break down, right? It looks like you're breaking down. It's the same thing that happened here. It's just happening bigger. You see it? Oh my gosh, how did I not see that? It's the same exact thing here. You see this wave? And then look at this build out on it. And there's your S-curve, your shallow S-curve down right there. And the same thing right here. And then you're building outward. So you can see like the waveform pattern going across this middle in the same way. So it's respecting the line. It's respecting the lines in the same way. Like it's treating them as the midpoint of like a big wave. So if I were looking at this from a I don't know how to do this better. I was looking at it from like a helicopter point of view. I would just say like here to here, here to here. And I would say like, yeah, it's respecting them. Even the patterning is the same though. That's the weird thing. So I don't know how else to do this though. Like, would you use a fib or what? If you go from the bottom to the top here, it's not like they're respected there. This is the middle line. It's not even close to being the middle. So more than a 50% swing. A 50% swing around the middle would have only gotten you up to like 787. So that would have been like really conservative. What if I do again from back here? Yeah, I don't know. Where does it go? Here? Yeah, same deal. There. Goes to the spring bottom. It's just the lower trend line. There's nothing too fancy about that. Let's see if I can snap it. Yeah, it's like that Pikachu meme. When I gasped, I was like, oh, what? Hang on. Yeah, right there. Look at that. It's those two markers. So for some reason, they like those two markers. I don't know why. The 1/3 and the 1/2, they tend to be right on the middle of those cat ears. It was the exact same thing over here, like identical on that bottom, which is strange. But then again, I also put the 1/2 or the 1 in the middle, not on the side. So just to be fair. No, I didn't. I did it right because I put it over here. That's where we are right now. That's where we're sitting. The price is sitting right there. So on the big picture, kind of looking backwards, I've got it marked off with my angles the way I want them, but yeah, on the big picture looking backwards, this move would be from the 1 back to the 1/4 if it could go all the way. And just here to 1, look at the distance. It's perfect. It's like exactly right. From 1 to 1/2, it goes back up to 896, which means we did the math right. So that gap distance is right there. It's like beautiful. And then the next one is right there. It's perfect. Well, it just goes all the way. I don't think it's going to do that. Because that's the place I think it will go back to, because that's where we hit previously. Like, can this really happen by July 8th? That's crazy fast. That seems unrealistic. I'm going to be honest. It doesn't seem possible. But I probably would have said the same thing about this moving like 300% in 2 days. That just seems unrealistic, right? This isn't even 2 days. This is several days. How else do you do this, though, Booksy? Like, I don't know. All I know is that looks correct to me, so I mean, it's really clean. There's nothing to say you can't break down. I'm not trying to like get rid of that as entirely as an option. I mean, certainly if it broke down here, the next of these GAN levels is down here at 330. I mean, it's kind of going backwards to what we talked about before. Like, in the event of a breakdown, this still works. It would still play the same. It's just the opposite direction. You wouldn't change this. It wouldn't just throw it out because you didn't like what happened. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to hide it for a minute so I don't get as messy here. I'm going to look at this build out. Push up, cat ear, drop. Yeah, it's like this. So this is basically like what we talked about the other day. Was like, hey, ideally don't have to come back down to the same low, but if you did, it would be okay as long as you break out. This was just a model for this move. It's pretty similar to what we see over here, except arguably this doesn't come down as low. Kind of makes me sick to my stomach. Doesn't it make you guys kind of sick to your stomach? I feel sick. Y'all are like, no, something's wrong with you, Bugsy. Go get checked out by a doctor. I think it's a matter of like the incredible amount of uncertainty in this bottom made me think that it might just be very bullish. But now I'm looking at it and I'm like, not only is it bullish, but it's a build out that potentially could get you all the way up to 18 very easily. Because we know that the way I would say we, but because a lot of you have been with me for a while. We know the way they build these out. This is the way they build them out. When they start doing these iterative moves, 1, 2, 3, they build them out with these drop-off levels. And the drop-off levels are what give you those slingshot moves later, if you get them. You have to get them. It can't be just like assumed that it's going to happen. Just like we couldn't assume like this was the right one, you know, we kept being too early. It's like early, right? And then smaller. Like how far are you going to go, you know? First you're like, no, it doesn't need to go lower. And then you're like, no, it doesn't need to break down beneath this low. And you're like, no, it doesn't need to fill the gap. And then before you know it, you're there and you're like, well, now what? Is it just going to keep dropping or what? But this build out is very, very good. And that's kind of all I'm going to have to be able to say about it, because for now, like, it's just really simple. Like I'm seeing a very strong setup. So I'm not going to keep these 50-50s on the chart. I don't think we need them. At least for me, I'm like, well, I need to mark them off with something, but visually, but I don't think that, I mean, it's not going to necessarily do us any good to keep them on the chart for now, because yeah, I mean, these are implied levels of support that you'll hit and tops that you'll hit. But we don't necessarily know exactly how these retracements would work, because like it could hit the top here and it could be retracing 30%, or it could be tracing 618. And so it doesn't really do me a lot of good to keep all this stuff on the chart. But to measure it, it was really important to get those levels. And now that I have the levels, I can probably do a better job of calculating potentially when you hit those spots, looking at where the interceptions are on these major creek bodies. Yeah, and I think we were right to do the way we did. So one of them's right here. It's frankly right around July 4th, which is a day off. So it's the Wednesday to the Friday. That one seems very likely if it's going to go. That would be one I think would probably hit, because if it was going to do that and then have this massive move on a Monday, Friday would have to set up before it. Otherwise it won't work. This one's trickier. Like we don't see any interceptions at all here. Like the major creek body doesn't intercept there. I think this is the one that's like 50-50 from the bottom through the reactive move here. Don't think these are all going to be fans, but there is this one. And then a little bit higher. So I'm going to do 2 just to kind of help me block it off, because I don't know which one's going to be more correct. I think it's this pocket here. And I'm going to use these. I'm not going to keep them for now. I'm not going to keep them. This one's already on the chart. We already have that. It's the white. That's sort of the main bottom. Something has to happen there. And then going backwards, this is the next breakdown here. So what I should do is keep the breakdown levels on the chart. Here, here, and then one more here. This one's real low. That's where it's at. So it's what I'm doing is I'm drawing it to the place that it dropped off. I'm not positive that I've got it perfect, but I'm going to use that as an indicator. This is like way too fast. This is like tomorrow. I'm going to use that as like an indication of what maybe where we kind of get up into that region and just give it kind of a pocket. So this, see, this is off because this is like way over here on the second. But it intercepts the creek on Wednesday. This looks like it just goes straight up. I don't know how to even draw this. It seems wrong. There's no time. You can't have any kind of adequate breakout. What the heck? All right, well, this one's easy. I think this has got to be today into tomorrow. There's no doubt in my mind. If we don't see a big move up today on Tuesday, I can't use this as timing because I don't know how else it would happen. This might be the least important of the crosses, oddly, but there is an SOS here, and I imagine it would have to be, again, pretty much right after this move. What about trajectories? I think this is kind of peak trajectory right here. 46 degrees. That's not enough. It's not fast enough. So it may play out along that trajectory at first. The steepest one is actually farther over here. 60 degrees. That one is more realistic, I think. Yeah, that makes more sense. That's a good interception here. So this is like Wednesday morning. It looks like Tuesday, but it's like turning into Wednesday. So Tuesday, we'd have to kind of make our way back up to over 448. You're like, that's today, Booksy. That's only a few more hours. I know. But that's the nature of this build out. So I'm just going to do it. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But these are your confirmation levels. I'm not going to push it farther. 448 today. Wednesday would have to be a massive day, but I think that Wednesday and Thursday of this week would have to be pretty intense because, I mean, I'll be frank with you, it doesn't look quite right. But maybe these aren't met in the way I think they're going to be met, you know. This to me would need to be like substantial, and I don't know how it could happen that fast. This would be like Friday, up at $6. That's crazy. It's parabolic, basically. I mean, it'd have to be parabolic in order to get up there at that time. So there's overlap. I think there's time to kind of spend, but these moves would have to be moving very, very rapidly. So, man, it seems impossible. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen. I think I'm being like way too bullish. 464 sometime Wednesday. I'm sorry, guys. I know I'm being like fatalistic, but it's hard for me to accept that this could be a possibility. I can see it clear as day as a setup, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I think, you know, I mentioned earlier, like this volume is so low. Like as soon as you get a buy-in and start going up, all these short positions are going to cover all the way back from 540. So I think that the iterative nature of this is all like iterative coming down. It's a copy-paste fractal, basically. You're doing like the same thing over and over. So this is all iterative, and I think that means that iterations, they reverse really fast because I think because of the shorts covering, that's what causes this kind of rapid fire trajectory upward when they finally like finish. They just rapidly exit back to the top. So like everything from here down to or up to 540, I think it will be rapid fire because it's almost a parabola down. So I think there's going to be this is very minor at the end, but I think there's going to be a really big flush back to the upside. Yeah. I was thinking like sideways earlier because there's a lot of time here. And maybe like this is like a last minute kind of flush where it waits till like Thursday or something dumb or Friday or Monday, you know what I mean? Like there could be all kinds of stuff that this just takes forever to get there. But I think that it's going to be this kind of parabolic breaking out. This is like 532. I think we're going to move really quick back up to 540. Because it would catch the shorts off guard if you start breaking these creeks, and you're going to have people covering left and right. Like as soon as these early ones start breaking, it's going to be like a catapult. You've got a lot of buildup, a lot of selling volume going down here as the buying's been happening. So you're going to have a markup plus all the way back to the top plus the shorts covering. Oh, if there's news, but you heard it here first. The setup's already here. So I'm not saying there won't be news, but it would not surprise me if there is. And that's what we're building into. But regardless, like the TA is setting up, in my opinion, where it needs to set up. So yeah, I think we're going to see it build out really fast. And then my guess is this is where things actually kind of slowed down, even though technically like it's going quick. My guess is that you're going to have a longer SOS because we haven't traded up here very much. So I think you're going to have more sideways here, and then I think you're going to have kind of like maybe the same kind of gap up, you know, on one day, chop the next day kind of thing that we've previously seen on AMC, where like you'll go up hard one day and then the next day you're really, really low. So it would not surprise me if like Wednesday we were up at like $9 and then 4th of July happens and Friday we drop down really far, for example. And then Monday you just gap up like really hard or something and just run all the way up. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff would not surprise me at all. Just massive swings if you got up to here going through that 4th of July holiday. Because a lot of people will freak out if on Friday it doesn't run and it drops down low. They'll think it's over and that was like the end of the move. And then it will build out and probably have some kind of a confirmation at the very end of the day on Friday, you know, like 750 or something. And then Monday you're running again. Because you're designing it, you would design it so that every time at the end of the day, you're going to have some kind of cliffhanger. Like, I'm not sure if it's going to continue or not, right? So I think going into Monday, Tuesday of next week, we would want to see it back above this creek, which is the white one. I think that's where you're going to see the most sideways because my thought is that that's probably the place we want to trade the most at this point. We've already traded the rest of this range. Like, there's nothing else here to trade. If this thing reverses, you're going to spend more time, I think, in an SOS and backup stage. It could drop below here. That's not a big problem. But it just has to come back above, you know, Tuesday or something. And then I think Wednesday will be a big day next week. Friday may be a down day, probably to get some stuff back out of the money or whatever. I mean, if it's not, it's not. Maybe it just keeps running. That's kind of what happened here. It just didn't really stop. Just kept going. But I feel like that would be a good day to take advantage of fear. And then Monday, you get a final rip to the upside. Somewhere between 13 and 18. And that's July 8th. This is a rough prediction, guys, because it's a really big move that I'm saying might happen. And I don't know. I've just been really hyped up for it. It makes me kind of worried. You don't want to be trading with your feelings like, oh, there's a feeling that this is going to happen. You want to watch the setup. I know it's there. Like, I can see the math. I can see how it builds out. It feels clear to me, but I don't want to put the cart before the horse, you know. We haven't really gotten any confirmation, so I'm really just kind of building a structure that hasn't given me anything yet. It's just sort of taking right now. And I don't know, that makes me kind of more bullish because I'm like, yeah, it would, wouldn't it? It'd just freak everybody out until the last second. The only thing about the gap fill that really bugged me, I've already sort of cleared it up. So if you guys are wondering where that change happened, we talked about it maybe on Sunday night, and then I think I talked about it again yesterday. In this situation, the gap can fill, and it did fill, but the gap could fill without breaking the range. So if it were to go down to that low creek, I got it drawn out here. It's this blue line. It's very low. So a drop down from here, I think, can take you really, really far, like down to the 350s again. And then you're probably just going to go for the next gap fill, to be honest. So I'm being like optimistic when I say that it doesn't have to break the range. And I think that's true because in this case, the gap is actually above the previous bottom. If you go back and you look at some of our previous gaps like this, they were below the bottom. So in order to fill the gap, you had to drop down below the floor to just get the gap filled. That's not a good place to be, but that's not where we are here. So even though I'm usually not a big fan of gap fill and run, I think that's not a wise way to kind of look at gaps. In this case, because the gap fills at 430, and we've talked about it, lots of people have said 430. Obviously, other people doing the TA said 430. I didn't particularly think we needed to go there, so I was wrong about that. But a lot of folks have said that, you know, so like kudos to those people. And if you came on and said it, kudos to you. So I'm not saying like in this regard that the gap fill is bad, because in this case, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm like, all right. And you can see on the 15-minute, this is divergence in RSI on this bottom. Like we're clearly like pushing down on weakness. We are not committing very much to this move by comparison to some of these other ones. It's 1, 2, 3, in my opinion, down. I don't know how long this takes, but I'm thinking that today would be the best time to get back over 448. If it doesn't happen today, maybe tomorrow, but that's, I mean, once you get past Wednesday, it's like you're way over here. I'm starting to see it as more difficult travel-wise. It's not impossible. That's a big move. And I got to be honest with you, the way that AMC broke out going into June is very similar to this. It's just not, the building of it is not the same. So like the way this built out is very different than the way it built out back then. So unlike back then where you had sort of the possibility of going to a new all-time high, at this point, the way it's set up, the possibility seems to only be to 18. And I think that's pretty realistic, meaning I don't believe that it's necessarily going to go beyond there. So I'm not going to advocate or support, just my TA doesn't support it. So I can't find a reason to do it. That to me pushes the creek. It does the test it needs to do. According to the build out, I think it's as high as this move would want to go. And then this might seem bad for some, but unfortunately on GME, I don't want to like make you upset or anything, but in the similar way, this build out is prepared to do something very similar to what happened in that move. And the weird thing about GME is if you go back and you look at the June move on GME, it just retraced back to this top, back to like, in this case, like 50. It never went beyond the all-time high. So if you do a comparison, and this is it right here on the left side, if you do a comparison, this ended up being like a double top motion into June. Pretty big difference, right? So the setup is very similar. It looks like it could do basically the same thing going back up to the top. So how would we know if it's going to hold or not? Like how would we know what the difference would be? Well, frankly, this is really flat. So by comparison, this was a lot steeper back here, and this is much flatter. So there's an argument that could be made that this is the steep line and that this is the flat line and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go there. This is the breakdown area. I think you're going to rocket back up, and I think these are giving you easy to enough to see targets back up to at least 40. We wouldn't know unless it held the creek cross. The problem is that in the previous example, the creek cross is like this midline right here, and it doesn't actually ever go there. Like, it takes forever, and it never really goes there. It just kind of goes sideways, and this is where you get that long sideways action until November. So what I'm thinking is that the best way to qualify this would be if it comes back immediately to test the creek cross, meaning the last two peaks. If it can do that and hold above 38, I might be more bullish. Or in this case, come back down to this floor. This could be, again, after like a July move. So if going into July 5th through the 8th, let's say GME doesn't make a new high, it pushes to like 48. Well, at that point, I hate to say it, I don't think the move is dead, but I think that there's a possibility that that previous target that we had, like the pushing past all-time highs, that may not happen, because if the goal here is to kind of continue the iterations forward of on a bigger scale, we're talking about a macro scale iteration, this could be thought of as like a recycling then. So you could potentially at that point have a long-term sideways action going into November, just like we went into November back here, right? November 2021. And it's difficult to say what happens after that, you know? So if we push up and this goes to 50, and this has then from July all the way to November, like a recycling action, you might expect it to kind of just dip back down into the 20s and go back up to the 30s. And this might be why that Citron dude, the Andrew Left dude, whatever his name is, it might be why he said, we'll see you guys from 40 to 50. Like, he's looking at it probably in this way. Like, we're going to just do the same thing we did last time. He's not going to get caught in the same motion. And he's thinking it's looking the same. So they're probably, his analysts are telling him, yeah, it's probably going to go back up to the top here. So I think there's going to be a lot of question marks about this area here. Like, I'm not saying it's going to go up or down necessarily. I'm just saying, like, I think this is kind of the place where more than likely, since we're looking at this as similar setups, I think this is the place where, you know, GME may not have as big of a move. Now, if by Tuesday or Thursday, or excuse me, by, you know, early next week or whatever, it's already up there and it's making supports, that's a different story. If we go up and we SOS just like AMC does, in theory, just based on the charting, it could be by Friday. Well, if by Friday we're already up here, that's a different setup. I mean, it clearly is moving at a much more rapid pace. So far, GME has looked much stronger than AMC, I would argue. And I think with the debt and all that stuff, the way that this is building out, with the offering and all that stuff, it could be very different from what we've seen previously. I'm just saying that right now, AMC is building out much like it did in June, the June move, and therefore I would be like, well, maybe this is doing the same thing that this did in June. And frankly, like right now, that could mean we don't go higher than the previous high, like 50. Now, before you say, like, that's never going to happen or this or that, just remember that, like, the people that are in this play have a lot of money, you know, and they're going to be looking for every opportunity they can to prevent it from moving and delay price action. So to me, this seems really logical, going up into the 8th to bring it back to the top. And then I think the question is going to be, does it find, you know, an LPS or a breakdown? I don't know. You know, that's about as far as I'd want to take it. And by the way, just to keep it simple, if you don't like the GAN fan, just remember, like, this is just a break over the main trend. So even if you were like, well, I don't think it's going to happen the same way, you could still look at this and you'd have to say, okay, well, let's say Booksy, it does go up to that price point by around the 9th or 10th, you'd still expect it to come back down and check the creeks. And that's where it would happen down here, like 33. So I suspect if we're going to break down and start doing the same thing, it probably happens in that same region. I hope that makes sense. So I'm not trying to be like bearish on it. I'm just kind of looking at the big picture thinking, well, I'm trying to treat them fairly. Like if I think AMC is going to have a second advancement, it did have a second advancement in June. But did GME have a second advancement in June? No, it did not. In the same time, it did have a markup that did not have a second advancement. Now, is this the same as last time? No, I think financially speaking, it's very different. Fundamentally speaking, it's very different. But that dude said he was coming back, 40 to 50 bucks. So to me, I'm like, okay. It looks to me like this setup is ready to kind of redo the same steps, albeit at a much faster speed. Can it happen early, like this week instead of July? I don't think so. But who knows? I was wrong about how long that last move took. I thought it was going to take 2 weeks. It took 2 days. So you never really know. I don't think it's as likely that this just starts bleeding upward. But the thing is if it does, you have to ask the question, like, does it intersect these targets? No, it doesn't. So, like, there's no reason to go early because if you went, like, let's say it goes this week, Friday doesn't get you, I mean, it gets you to 1579. There it is on a Friday. So, like, could it happen? Yeah, but I don't necessarily think that you go any further then because there's no, I mean, it would be like some kind of backup with another big up thrust. Like, I don't know. The targets are the targets. I can't say that they're definitely going to happen or not going to happen, but they're there, you know. And I know what folks think. They think that the setup here, you know, is not as strong. And you're right. It's not as strong as it was. I thought that was the comparison. It's not as strong as it was, in my opinion, back in 2021. Just in terms of AMC, the setup doesn't look as strong. The move itself is being based on a very similar kind of price action. You have a long-term downtrend over a few years, and then you've got basically, you know, 8 months or whatever, 6 months of like sideways, essentially into a bottoming action. But the implied move here would be some kind of auto reaction, not necessarily you just rip and go to the moon. I'm all for it. I'm not going to be like going crazy on, you know, exiting long positions. But I think that for options plays, this is all I'm really looking for. I'm not looking for beyond that. I'm not of the opinion that it's just going to keep ripping. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not saying this is going to happen either, but if history repeats itself, which it often does, or it's very similar, we've made a giant M shape here. We need to come back down and test creeks. It's going to take time. And we've got gaps now way below. And frankly, if you look at a repeat of, let's just say, again, going into elections or something, if you look at a repeat of the action on a micro scale as it happened, you still would expect it to come back down and make a new low, because that's what happened on the macro scale. Push up, and then you get a chop down. So ignoring like the kind of mess that I drew, although it's starting to look pretty good, taking this into consideration that the main motif that we have here is still at play. It's the way that the stock is being traded, period. I mean, it's evident. If I think this is the big move to the upside, then my expectation would be after this happens that you'd have some kind of a distributive cycle back down, right, in a corrective measure to some degree. And that at that point, yeah, we either make a new bottom or we fail and make a new low. And this is what happened on our bigger setup, where we came all the way back down to like that big creek, right? And by the way, you guys might be thinking like, well, are you just throwing stuff out left and right and just like not remembering things? No, This is still representative of like a 50% in a bigger area. That 613 is still my 50% marker, and I'm not throwing that out the window. I think it's really, really important. But I went back and I looked at January, and January did the same thing. It pushes up through that LSPY, then it actually camps just above the creek, and it did the reaccumulation just below the 50% mark, and then it pushes up the rest of the way in June. And then we get a long-term like falling out, right? Basically, we get a gigantic cat ear kind of setup going back down. And ultimately, you don't break down until you come back below that 50% mark. That ends up being kind of the big retracement. And this is where I would be most concerned about a drop later on. This is why I'm not positive that even if the market on the whole goes up into November, you got to remember AMC might take advantage of those pullback periods in the market. You know, the couple months or whatever in August, while IWM, if we think this happens, there might be a period up until August or even later, September, where you're going kind of sideways here. I mean, you could technically go sideways all the way through September and just chop here and build out another SOS on top of the SOS. Well, that's great, right? Yeah, it is great, because then if it moves, I think it's going to go far. But during that time period of down, those 2 months of downside on IWM, they could easily yield some pretty nasty stuff, especially if, you know, we don't hold certain levels early on. I mean, there's no silver lining there. I think you could pretty easily see how this could be 2 months down. And I know this is like a massive downward move, but if the goal is, again, to retrace and to build out on the structure that we keep talking about, you got the first part of it. You got the shallow S-curve, right? The second part is this push up. This is your first M cross, right? This is January. And then the second part is November. You know, this is what gives you the fuller retracement back to where all of this started. This is usually how it sets up. But the rest of it is then to something like this, right? Usually this is like coming from way, way, way high or something, but there's usually a drop before this, and there is on the macro. So this is all correct. But then the rest of it is a time period of consolidation where you're trying to sort of test that middle of the S-curve. So the rest of it ends up being, I know I'm dropping this line like way down here, but I'm doing it on the example. The rest of it ends up being coming back to retest this area. This is the same thing that happens on the macro. It's happened here on these little workouts. And we don't know. Like, this could easily yield more upside, but I think it's more likely going to yield more downside, to be honest. There'll be a couple telltale signs. Like, more than likely, again, this is based on what happened in January. More than likely, this trend will be where the cat ear is. So, like, right now it's pretty wide. It's, like, way over here. So it would be somewhere in August. You know, if you were to come sideways, it'd be something like that, probably. I mean, who knows at that point. But this is something that I would look for. And then when you get to that point, it'd probably be at that point that you'd see like a more major move. This is what happened to us in November. We broke out of the major funnel that was going up. There was a wedge to the upside, but there was a funnel on the outer part and like a trend, basically. And this should look a lot like the structure that we expect to see, because then you get the cat ears down, and then this is where things are uncertain, because you don't know. In some cases, there's a bottom support that's at the same level, and you go ahead and jump the creek, but it all depends on whether or not you can successfully do that. Unfortunately, AMC has yet to show that it can successfully do that, and it has consistently gone back to new lows in order to jump the creek. So on the big picture, you might say this is starting to look a lot like November, or this is starting to look a lot like everything else we've seen. Yeah, it is. And this is, again, like another, you guys are like, what? Yeah, I don't think it's going to go down forever, but this is sort of another version of the same exact thing down here, where you're going to test the creek low. It's literally the same thing. springs within springs, plans within plans. And this is all playing out on a much larger scale. That's another version of this. Why do I think it has to happen that way? Because that's the way it happens. AMC will just continue to do this until it can't. Like, this is the cycle. I don't know how else to put it. I could be wrong about it, but I don't think I am. And at the end of the day, like, this is the spring, right? So, like, we may be in a situation where, and I've talked about this quite a bit, where this may not look great at first, but over time, if this eventually starts building out, this is where you could start seeing some really massive crosses, potentially. Because eventually what should happen is that this no longer makes a low. So like maybe you get to this point and it doesn't make a low. And that's where the change happens. Then you start exiting these creeks in force. And so you would jump the first one, then you would go over and jump the second one, then you'd go over and jump the third one or whatever, and you'd be back up at these markers, right? These cross trends like this. Those are the moves that are ultimately going to be like the big ones. And I don't think they happen for a while, but I've already talked about that. I think they probably take till about 2026 to finish out. I do. I'm kind of lame like that though. So I disagree if people think it's going to go to like 30 or 40 right now. If it goes to 30 or 40 right now and then it distributes, I think it's over. Like in general. Like I think the build out for that bigger move is probably done. Because they don't need to go any higher. Like if you come up immediately here to like 30 or 40, it's kind of like doing this. You don't have the rest of this, and you don't have the build out. You just have a distributive action. That's what happened to us in August. And you know what happened after August. So if you're wondering like why I think that's the case, if you just run to 30 or 40 right now, I think you're going to hit that marker. You'll hit it. You'll get that exit. And then it's too low. And you've already come down, so it's a sign of weakness. So then you end up coming really, really low. And this is on like the super macro, like the biggest possible level. It'd be a big squeeze, that's for sure. You'd make a lot of money on it, but then if you're still in it, you're probably dead in the water. So while it might be kind of crappy to think about this like iterating and iterating and iterating, the truth is that you get a far better build out if it does it on pace. So maybe this doesn't make a new low. Maybe it only comes to 3 here. Okay, fine. Well, if it starts to go sideways and do that shallow S-curve and then it builds out and it builds out and it never makes another low again, that's fine. It's still like the last iteration. It's not saying like this next one has to go lower. That's not what I mean. I just mean that you would be waiting for those iterations to stop going lower, if that makes sense. And once that happens, then you're in a place where, okay, we found some strength. The market is officially turning. You've exhausted the sellers. There's nothing else left. They're no longer making springs. They're making LPS. You're making an LPS. And that's that. Why couldn't it be back here? Why didn't it happen back here? Because I think it's the build out of the shallow S-curve. I think the shallow S-curve is not the end. It's like the beginning of the end. This is the way that the bottoms on AMC tend to set up with this kind of a motion. And so we've just done that on the macro, which is good. I'm just not convinced we're just going to like hightail it out. And if we did, I'd be, again, very concerned that, okay, we pull back, we go back up, and then what? We hit that marker at like 30 or 40, and then we fill the gap, and then we're done. I don't know. Then I think you're looking at a massive drop again, 30 to 40, back down to like 4. Sounds a lot like what happened when we went from 70 down to 4, doesn't it? You know? It's like same old, same old. Hello in Amsterdam. I think we are, but I'm also not gonna all I can tell you is that right now it's a really hard setup to sell because, and I don't want to sell it. That's not my job, but it's a really hard setup for me to talk about because it looks really, really good. And that makes it even more difficult because you're like, well, sometimes when it looks really good, it doesn't work out and then you're really bummed out, you know? So you got to temper your expectations. But it's looking feisty. Like there's a really clean path all the way back up to $15 to $18 going into next week, which seems crazy. Seems way too fast. I know, but it's what I'm looking at. So I don't know how else to see it right now. If that doesn't happen, that probably means we're in a distribution because the way this is set up, there's just nowhere to go. If you find support and you start breaking upward, you're going to start ripping back up. Shorts will cover back up to 550. You'll get the push up to the SOS, and then you're basically going to go. That may be the only place here, maybe around 580, where we might get stuck and end up with a bad distribution. I think you could have a distribution right here and like an LSPY or a UTAD. So this would be like the big question mark if it went up, would be right in here. So, but everything else, like this one, this area, would be like, maybe, you know. But everything else looks really good. So I can't emphasize enough like waiting for confirmation. So what I did is I marked off a place on the chart, 448. That would be an early place to start confirming the moves. And that's assuming that I got the measurement right and we don't go any lower. So we may have actually gone down to 433. So these could all be like a penny off now. But it's close enough that I don't really think it matters. So I think this is probably, I know it's proportionally starting to look more like another version of these. It's possible we could go lower still. So I don't want to speak out of turn. But as we go, I'm going to try to mark off the levels. And I think that 448 is still, no matter what, 448 is going to be one of those levels. So I think it's iterating down. I think we're losing sellers as we go, and we think we're losing paper hands. I think it's going to reverse hard. And I think GME is doing the same thing, and I think it's going to reverse pretty hard and head back up towards 50. I'm more concerned about GME at the top and the LPS than I am AMC, but both of them will have to prove something. And my big thought today, if I had to pick one big thought, it would be that IWM sort of needs to just finish this little bottom. I've already done the math on it. It's set up, if it can find support over 200 here and get above 202. So those are two big keys to this breakout. 200 support, and then push up, and then find support over 202. I think it could easily move to 214. I could think the move is set and it's ready to go. It's strange to be at this point of like, it's about to go kind of stuff. And I know every day feels like that, but you never know, right? Like this could rocket and then go really far sideways here or something. You know, like there's always going to be the possibility that the measurements are not quite there or the timing's not quite there. But the levels, they don't care about timing. So trying to like keep that in mind that like first it's support at 200, then it's support at 202. Those are two very big confirmations, 202 especially. First 200, then 202. So if I'm looking at this locally, check out IWM locally and then take a look at it. It looks like it could be gearing up for a last minute drop, but it's also squashed yet again. I think it's getting ready. So I don't want to be the guy that's like calling, you know, wolf here, crying wolf. But I'm dead serious. Like I think this is a position of fear in the market. I think it's meant to look really bad. I don't know why exactly we have to be this fearful right now, but I'm not seeing it. Like I hope I'm not wrong. Gosh, I hope I'm not wrong. Oh man, I'm betting heavy on it. So I hope I'm not wrong. But I really think that you guys are like, then you're super biased, aren't you, Booksy? I don't know what to tell you. I'm trying to not, like I said, I'm trying not to put the cart before the horse here. Got to make sure that the technicals are in line. You get the confirmation breakouts and all that stuff. But it just looks really good. Oh, it looks nice. It happened over here, but it's the same thing. That's more the volume I wanted to see on a spring anyways. All this other volume was too light. Kept mentioning that. It's a big 4 top. 1, 2, 3, 4. Drop. So it's got to come back up above. Shoot, this is weird. Here. It's kind of working out to be like near that EMA. This is a spring to me. And then the creek jump happens. Gosh, that's a really good move. This would be an unbelievable setup if this happens. I don't know if I'll ever get something better than this, to be honest with you. I'm not trying to like sell myself short, but in terms of like a major market bottom, outside of the bottom that just happened for like AMC, I haven't really been a part of that many of them. Like the August one I was there, the March one I was there. Those are the last two big ones. Everything else has been kind of like so-so, like the setup wasn't the best, and then you get a big move like 50% or something, and then it dies. These are big move setups. And I mentioned this earlier, I'm not trying to sell you guys on MPW, because I know that some people are like, I don't get why you like this. Why do you think this is good? All I can say is that oh man, that creek jump goes right back above. Look at that. It goes right back above the drop, this heavy sell-off drop in. It's perfect for covering. Getting those shorts to exit right here. If you break out above this top. Oh, that's gross. There's an SOS. But I found out the other day, apparently, I didn't really ever check it. Apparently, MPW has like a over 30% short interest. So it's very high. Which is awesome, because if this breaks out in the spring, it's going to be like an actual short squeeze, which is nice. And they've already done a lot of squeezing on this stock, as you can tell, in some of these bigger moves up. But apparently the short interest is still like sky high. Probably because it's been in a downtrend forever. You know? So here's what I'm seeing across the market is that I don't know why exactly, but everything seems to be very, very cleanly set up to get you to some really nice targets on Monday the 8th. Some of these targets are going to be continuation targets, like they might continue. Others I think are probably going to be backup targets where you're going to hit something and then go sideways for a while. I can't really say universally what might happen, but almost everything looks like July 8th to me. And I've done a lot, so I hope that, again, I hope I'm right, but yeah, it's almost exclusively like the same time frame, like maybe the 8th through the 10th of July, that early July move. Yeah, AMC is struggling. It's got to make that move. But even look at the build out here. Like, look at the build out on this bottom. There's like, the volume is really weak. Y'all are like, what? What are you talking about? I'm not weak. No, it really is. It's like super weak. It's just crossing and crossing and crossing. Keeps going down. I know, it's like this really nasty terminal effort, but it's iterative, which is like strange. So this getting these, it's getting these like motions down like this. See that? And start breaking out, it's going to be violent. Yeah. It's just laying up, laying up, laying up. Oof. Yep. I know, you're looking at it like, well, it looks like it's about to tank because it's pointed downward more rapidly. Yeah, it's pointed downward more rapidly. RSI is building up, and the volume is just piddly. There's like no volume here. I mean, look at that. It's just completely flat. This is a key reversal move if it happens. I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't stop. You probably would get a massive move right up to maybe 521. This is where the first major sell-off happened. What usually happens on these kind of moves is on the bounce, you'll get like an early bounce that looks a lot like the first entry move. So if it's like this whole length, you get a move that looks like the whole length. I don't know if there's a reason for that or what, but it just so happens that that's often the case. So oftentimes, like the first move out will be like a move right back up. So this again implies that you come all the way back up to like 520 pretty easily. And I think it has to do with, once again, like the distance traveled within a trend. So setting up like establishing a bottom here means that this is where the previous bottom was, so you'd have like a trend move. So they'd basically be like, all right, well, we moved this far the first time, we can move this far this time. But I also think it's an eradication of short positions. Like if this starts ripping, everybody that entered shorts down to up to 520 here, all those short positions are going to get kind of erased on the buy-in. So I think the first move is probably going to be really big, but I don't know if it's going to happen until you get a foothold established. So I'm still watching today to see if we can get above 448. That'll be a big key. It'll either be today or like first thing in the morning tomorrow. I can't really tell. But I think that's key because that's the first wave backwards. It would be a jump of, I think, two creeks. This one downward and then this one outward. So you'd end up with two kind of jumps here. 1, 2. So push up, back, push up, back. But then almost more importantly, you're getting a reversal on these wave breakdowns because most of these wave breakdowns have been pretty consistent. You've got no retest back to the upside. So in theory, like we start looking at the wave breakdowns, you're like, yeah, well, in a reversal, you're just going to go back up, back up, back up. And each one of these is incrementally like set up to get you to these breakdown levels that we had, which are all like 50-50s back up to the upside. I did that earlier in the stream. It's a really simple math at this point. You know, it's just the way that these iterations set up and if it's going to be a slingshot. I'm using the word if because I'm trying to be careful not to put the cart before the horse here. Like, it's just a setup. There's not confirmation until the setup breaks, but if it starts happening, it'll be pretty good because the setup is really clean. And we really only ever see this. Last time I saw it was like this was in March. So I like March. I know you guys are like, well, you like it too much. And then of course we just saw one of these very similar setups in May, but this is more specifically like a shrinking iteration, and we don't see a lot of that visibly on the chart. It's usually like not that obvious, I suppose is the better way to put it. Or it's like a macro kind of thing where you're not really going to notice it. So if you wanted to get really kind of hype about it, what I would do is probably plot out this steep one and then see if this early creek, it did break here, flipped over. See if it generates a lower low. Because once it stops generating lower lows, it's usually about the time that it flips. So here it's at 433, here it's at 433. So in theory, could this be done? Yeah, but remember the level it just broke down at, the 435? Look at the little LSPY right there. That not the exact same thing that we were talking about on these guys when they chop sideways before the drop? So this is the big drop of this particular move. So you can look at it and think, well, does that mean it's going to continue to drop? Well, I don't know. But what we would then do is look at 435, because if it's not made a lower low, that's a check. We haven't seen a lower low. So that's a positive. There's a double bottom here at 433. Okay, so for now, it hasn't made a lower low. So then the next checkbox would be, does it come back above 435? Because if this jumps 435, assuming that we're not doing some larger range build out, and I can't promise that, that could be the beginning of the iterations completing, because that would be the first time that we've reversed back over one of these second cat ear drop-offs. So if we push over 435 with some strength, I mean, that's what it looks like to me on RSI too. Chop up, down, chop up. You expect there to be a down, but if the down doesn't happen and you start reversing, it should just be like a snowball. I said the same thing last Friday and it didn't happen, but I'm confident in that methodology. All right, so it's going back down. So until we see that happen, and you guys are like, what? Booksy, are you flip-flopping that fast? I don't know yet. We'll see. But until we see that happen, it could be really, really tiny. Like this could come down to like 430 on the dot or something, right? And then do it again and be really, really, really small. Until we see that reversal happen, you won't know. But once it does happen, it's like, okay, then you'll start seeing it build back out, like layer to layer here. And each one of these should build out pretty fast. I think this one is going to cut through it pretty quick. And that's the kind of stuff I want to see. So if it goes down again, let's go to the minute chart. Oh man, look at that. Ugh. Look at barcoding. That's horrendous. It's just garbledy-gook. Yeah, this isn't done yet. It's still sitting at 433. But I'm going to move the creek out just a bit so I can see it better. Because maybe on this like really micro level, we'll get to see it happen. Yeah, it jumped over. It did jump over and hit it. So technically it doesn't have to go lower. Most of these, you'll notice when they jump over here, they're like too far away and they take too long to get back down. So they end up jumping over and then they have to come really low to get back to the creek jump. That's where you get those lower lows built into the iterative nature of it. So if it doesn't happen, then that's good. But I guess I could see it coming back down. So we'll find out. If it comes back down again, y'all, I have no idea how to chart it. It's too small. I'm probably not going to chart it. He proceeds to chart. If it came back down again, I'd have to do something like this, I guess. But I don't even know how to do that effectively. Like, it actually looks like kind of wide. So this is the level right here where things start getting really spicy. But until this point, I don't think you can say there's any forward momentum yet. Notice that the buying that's happening is like super shallow. Like none of the buying is pushing the stock up. It's all like keeping it very, very relaxed. Probably a lot of this is actually spring action like buying, where the operators aren't even necessarily buying. They're just kind of pinning the price. letting the sellers sell, and then they might buy on the way out, but they're probably not going to buy right here. I'm guessing a lot of this, maybe this is just like protective buying or buy orders, but I'm going to guess a lot of this is just for pinning purposes, the trades. And then until you get the markup, that's when you start seeing the operators buying, because they'll push the price. They won't, if they think the price can keep going lower, we'll just say the algorithms, whatever you want to call them, it'll chop. It just won't, they'll buy enough to keep it floating, but they won't buy enough to break it out until it's time. So I don't know if this is the low, but I'm looking at this creek on the outside. I'm like, I don't really see where, I don't know where it would be. Like, it'd have to be like here. It's starting to look like you can't go any lower. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, this looks like a creek jump right here. So where's it going to go? Well, in order to retest a creek jump, you would just have it come down, but where's it? It can't go below 430 here. Never say never, Booksy. If it takes a long time, I guess it could. If it chops sideways, it could drop again. I just want to see it over 435. As soon as it gets over 435 with some support, I think we're going to start seeing these positions start getting eaten up here to here, here. Boop, boop, boop. So the danger, I guess, of all of this is getting, again, too ahead of it, because you could easily say, like, do you think this is going to happen because of the setup? But you can't. I mean, you can. I guess you can trade on it if you want to trade on it. It's your choice. But you can't say it's confirmed until it's confirmed. So there's no, unfortunately, there's no real way to, like, contain my excitement and then also tell you at the same time that it's really not confirmed yet. There's no confirmation. So, you know, at this point, everything is more or less just speculative until we start seeing that build out happen. And by the way, my account's down quite a bit. Like, it was down 7% Friday, you know, 5% Monday, 6% today. Like, I'm in those positions with you. Like, if you're sitting there, like, wondering, well, what's going to happen? I'm with you, man. I don't think it's, I don't think it's an easy trade, you know? Man, there's a lot of bids right now. I'll buy at that level for sure. I'll take it right now. So I'm still in the trades, and I'm like not budging. Because even though I don't like the position, some of the positions I maybe opened too soon, I still feel like there's a really strong setup here. And I'm betting that this reverses and reverses hard. And that's where I'm at. And I don't have anything before July 5th, which is good. Because July 5th, I think we'd already be moving. And then most of my stuff is way out in January or late July for the shorter term stuff. This is going to be fun if it starts going. Yeah. I'm not afraid of this. This kind of movement today is like nothing. It's a horrible gamble, right? Because you have to have conviction if you're looking at spring actions. They're not. they're 100% interpretive in a lot of ways, because you could easily see a hook happen and be completely wrong, and then you're in bad shape. So you just got to be honest with you about it. It's a risk-on proposition that I'm taking, and I'm basing it on technical analysis of the market on the whole and my disbelief that it's as bad as a lot of people say it is. I gotta be honest with you guys. That's Nacho Dip. I gotta be honest with you guys. I think MPW is like the biggest play that I have right now. Don't get me wrong. If we run on GME and AMC, I'll make really good money. But if we run on MPW, if that thing squeezes, even up to like $7 or $8 right now, I'd be in good shape. Because I've been buying ridiculously low price call options this whole time, and just keeps dropping. I'm just like, okay. I don't know how else to do it right now. 30% short interest on this thing, man. That's high. It looks so bad too, like on a technical stance. There's so many things about it that look bad. So why are you in the play? I don't know. I just don't. I think it's the game. I think it's like it's designed to be a shakeout. I think it's designed to spook people. I think it's building out potentially a bottom, and if it creek jumps, that's the confirmation. I know I'm in it way too early. Like, I'm aware of my shortcomings here. Boop. Okay. It doesn't mean anything. It just means it's above. So there's still a possibility that I got it wrong, and like what we're seeing is the end result of a hook. Because like I don't want to like shoot myself in the foot here. I just said that this was a good thing. But remember, like, the way the iterations work is important to note that, like, yes, that's a positive sign, but previously on this thing, these end guys have like kind of double bottomed and then come back up high in the very last minute. So I'm kind of looking at this one right here. Like, it did technically come above and then it dropped below. So before you go crazy and be like, oh, it's happening, I would say that just be patient, because it's not enough to come above it. Most of these actually have done that. They've all kind of dropped low and then come above it. So what matters is the reversal, which is support. So it has to build out a support at 435. Otherwise, you could still be in it for another low. Again, I'm not really sure how to read that if it does that, because the creeks here are super steep, and I'm not seeing that here. This all looks really flat. I don't know where it is. I'm just trying to be honest. Like, I was looking at it earlier, and I was like, I don't get it. Maybe here, like, this is kind of the last one I would look at. And it would have to take time, but it's starting to look like they're flattening out, which is a good sign on a bottom like this, if it's a bottom, because if they're flattening out, it means that you're basically setting up for creek jumps that are going to land higher. So you don't want a creek that's like super steep where you have to come like all the way back down to get the cross, right? This is often what happens on like AMC, is it sets up these creeks and like they're ridiculous steep. And then in order to get down and hit the creek, you have to hit a new low. But if the creek starts setting up more sideways, then as you come down, you find that, oh, I don't have to come really low to get to the creek. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you're making a higher low. That's almost always how it happens, but it's like super subtle, like last minute kind of thing. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's where it is. And as soon as it makes that low and it starts pushing back up, that's where the turn happens. But unfortunately, this kind of stuff happens all the time on AMC, and it ends up just being like another, we'll call it a hook or whatever, where it fails. This is very common. So you got to be really careful. So I'm like, even though I'm like really bullish that it came above, I'm like, cool, it went above. I'm also like, well, it could just be a hook. So I wanted to make a higher low here. Right now, I don't know. I'm having trouble because this is so friggin' small. Excuse me for my language, but this is so small. I can't really tell what the heck's happening with the... I'm just kind of guessing. Like, I see a little bounce there. I think that's the creek. And see how it's like wider? No, I can't tell you when to buy or sell. I can tell you that I have price targets up near 15 to 18, and then I can tell you that $9 is another place you potentially stop, and $6. So if you're looking at numbers, I can tell you that 6 is a possible resistance. Technically, there's a resistance before then as well. I mean, if you want to get really precise about possible places of rejection, all of these spots are possible rejection spots because these are critical resistance and support levels. They've marked them off on the way down. The second cat ear always breaks down from one, always. And so it may be a center mark, it may be a high trading liquidity, it may just be a support or resistance level, but no matter what, that last bit of chop right before the big pop and drop, which is usually what happens, that's where the key level is in terms of the math. So my thought is that on a bigger reaction here, if it starts happening, that you probably could get all the way up to this 532. And if you were going to have a distribution, this might be a good place to do it. But really, any of these levels, like 486, 490 here, you could see how it could come up and not jump this creek. These are your major motions. And if it happens, then you have to wait to see if, okay, is it going to find support on the previous creek and then go? You know, we don't know. So there's a lot of questions. You can't really just look at these and say it's going to go straight through them. It might take some time. So there's going to obviously be back and forth. And that's not to say that you have to tune into me to hear them all. I'm just saying, like, pay attention to where those jumps are because it could take time to back up. And you might see a backup that looks like a breakdown, and it's not really a breakdown. Or you might see a backup that does break down, and it's a breakdown. And then you need to be like, all right, that's that. It's not going that way, you know. But I think this one's key up here around 560. It makes sense because it's basically like the previous tops from over here. And if you were to do an SOS, this is kind of the area that you would more than likely come back to because of that previous top. So look at the breakdowns again. There's another one on the cat ears, and notice like that's where it came back to right there, you know. So if you look way back here on that big one, that was the Aren't Roaring Kitty stream, I think. That's the one that I think is going to be maybe the most dangerous locally. So I would say about 550. You know, obviously you could see the same kind of breakdown if you pushed high and then broke below 550 or broke below the creek here. That's possible. You know, so you'd have to watch for that. And then I think the next big place would be up here at 9. And then after that, it's either 18, maybe 1830 or 1570. I'm not going to play much up to all the way up to 18. I'll tell you that. Like if this were to move hard and I can get the positions that I want to get sold, I'm probably going to be selling once it hits like 14, you know, like I'm not talking about share positions necessarily at all. I'm just saying like I have options that I've got. I'm not going to be holding them to try to hit a peak. It's just not my style of trading. Some people do that. They'll just set a limit, but I'm not really good at, with options contracts, I'm not really good at estimating where those tops are going to be from an option standpoint. I can see the price target, but I don't know what's going to happen with volatility. And so I'm always like, well, I don't know, you know. I don't want to set a limit and then miss it. So I usually do very active trading. I'll be honest with you. I'll set stop limits if it passes a price, but a lot of times I'm just doing market trades. I'm just like, all right, I'm done. And I just sell. And I'm talking about selling contracts, not shares. If you're flipping out, don't flip out. Because I don't I just don't personally trust the limit orders very much. And then I don't also know if my limit order is going to get hit. I hate the idea of missing it by like a penny. I've done that before and it's missed by like 2 pennies. And I just completely lost the sale. And then it drops like 15%. And you're like, well, great. You know, all I had to do was like drop it by a couple pennies. I would have gotten the sale, but I didn't do it. So if you're really good at that, all power to you. I'm still practicing and I'm not that good at it. So each of these would be levels that I would consider even mildly offloading some. And it just depends on what the profits are. If the profits are garbage at 620 and I'm only making like 10%, then I might be waiting, you know, and just say, okay, well, I'm just going to wait. I mean, we don't know. Maybe volatility doesn't move as fast as you might expect or something, or they crush it, you know, in the middle and you're like, okay, well, I don't know. You know, that's not usually the goal of the operator in the midst of a move, but of a markup, if it's a markup, but it could happen. And there's been times where that happens and I'm like, I guess I'll just wait and not worry about it. So those are the levels that I'd watch on the way up. I wouldn't watch, I probably wouldn't even really watch my account except to just see if things are growing appropriately. And then if I get 100%, I usually sell that amount. So if I get the full money back from the original trade, if by that point, maybe you had like, this is just an example, but let's say you bought like 10 contracts and maybe they're down like 20% or 30% right now. And then the price rips and then you're up 50, 60%. Well, at that point, yeah, you could offload because that's a good trade. Being up 60% is great. But if you were to wait until like 100%, you may even be able to sell less contracts and get the original investment back. And then you could just hold like half of them. And that's what I did on last time we ran up is like I bought a certain amount. And then as soon as I hit 100% and doubled it or whatever, 200%, because the volatility hiked, then I was like, all right, I sold just enough to get the original investment back. And then I'm just riding on profit. Then anything else I sell from there is just profit because I got my original value back. As long as I don't sell in the loss, right, I don't lose money, then I'm scratching. That's a very simple strategy. There's nothing fancy about that. You can do that with anything in the market, but that's the thing that I like to do because it makes sense to me. And then the last time I made like really big bucks on AMC was actually the August move. I made decent money on the last move. Like it was good money. I just didn't have a huge amount invested. So I'm not going to complain about it. Don't hear me wrong. August 2022, I had like a huge amount invested and I made a lot. But that time what I did is I exited slowly and I played it differently because I had in the money calls, out the money calls, and leaps. And I purposely sold the out the money calls that were more short term. I kind of sold those early. They had the most chance of running hard, but I sold like at a slower pace the in the money calls because I wanted to see what happened to the top, and they really weren't changing very much. So they were kind of like my stability trade, I guess, where they grew and then they kind of plateaued and then they just kind of sat there. So it was easy to not sell them. And so I ended up doing a lot more, I guess, dancing during that one. I was like flipping stuff around, and I mean, the only thing I didn't really mess with was my shares at the time. But all right, so this made a higher high. This made a higher high, meaning it went above this high back here, 436. It went up to 437, but did it jump the creek locally? Okay, yes. On the micro, I'd say yes, it did. Right down here, probably jumped. That's done. I'm not going to look back at that very much. Could it come back down and test low? Sure. But now I want to look at this advancement because I don't think this actually jumped. So from here, we got support off 434 right there. So if it came back down hard, where would it go? Well, maybe 433, maybe 432 if it took too long. But right now it's still safe. It's not triangulation wise, it's wider. This is a wider creek and it's not coming down as low. So we're talking about right here, right? So I want to see it break above 438. I want to start seeing higher highs at this point, especially because of this. So this is like the major cross right here. And if it were to peak and then drop out, then this ends up just being like another wave down. You know, you don't want that. So I know what I've said. I wanted to get support over 435. That's a positive. But now I want to also see a move higher because we haven't really gotten that yet. We got a little bit of higher here. That's fine. I want to see it move above these next peaks and start doing basically signs of strength. So coming out above here would be really positive. I don't really want to see more sell-offs downward if we can avoid it. Because if we were to come up and distribute, and this is just one of those things, like I can't tell you how to see this or whatever, but you could easily see this become like a UTAD kind of deal. And then if that happens, it's like, well, crap, you know, that means it's done. So step one was to get kind of a pricing above 435. We're still dancing around that number. We haven't quite made support yet. We're not sure yet, right? So chopping there. Step two would be to watch it push out and make the higher high. And ultimately, that's where, frankly, most people are going to buy in smart money wise on an SOS. So might take an operator to move it there, might not, but you have a better chance of a successful trade if you wait for the SOS. So I'm thinking it's like here, 438 up to 439 maybe, 437 to 439. So like this build out. So you got to be a little bit mindful of the possibility here because we're widening that we could end up with a slide that goes low and then it's just kind of reversing the setup. I know it stinks. I wish it were consistent every time, but it's just not. So maybe this is a better one. It's a little higher. I wish it were not like that kind of tooth and nail, like, oh crud, I gotta wait for this and wait for that. That's just not the way it is. Like AMC likes to pull fast ones on people, and it will often make it look really bullish and then it'll pull the rug, or it'll look really bearish and then pull the rug. I think if this is not a hook, it's the turn for sure. Because it's already hopped over this creek, which means that at this point, this wedging action should have a decent retracement of the 618, which takes you back to the top, 450. So I'm like feeling it. I feel like there's a good chance. I just don't want to, again, say that it's confirmed if it's not like quite done yet. Booksy, you wait forever for confirmation. Well, scared money doesn't make money. Like at some point you have to just say that's enough for me and then you go in. You can't invest, right, always waiting for the next level because then you're just never going to invest. There's dozens of levels, right, going up. We just looked at them all. So at some point you have to just say, all right, this is enough for me. But here, again, it's like I don't know that 435 is finished, you know, unless it can break out and form a new high and really rally. So if I'm being like really serious, it's kind of like here, right? And again, it's like you're not going to necessarily get the perfect answer. We've looked at these shallow S-curves quite a bit over the last few weeks. And right now, the middle of that shallow S-curve is 435. So what that would tell me is that you could get like a 50-50 move up and then still end up forming out. I know this is a bummer, but you could still end up forming out like a range here, you know. There's not really like any kind of rule that says it can't range out. And I said maybe into Wednesday, but we could get like a spring action today and then go Wednesday. I mean, so like this is not. I don't know because of the size of this if this would happen, but this is not impossible. I hate it. I know. Yeah, you can't. You're never gonna make money if you don't invest. I mean, that's just the way it is. So at some point, you have to say like, that's enough for me. That's enough confirmation for me. GME will be the same. I think it's the same setup, but it's a little different in terms of the build out, but it's the same principles. So it's currently sitting on its, and I did a lot of stuff earlier in the stream with the fans. These are pretty cool, but the build out that matters the most is this right here, which is a breakout here could lead you back up to 28, 27, 28 level, and then from there I think you're going to move up pretty hard to at least this $38 level. That's my opinion. And I think it'll happen going into July 8th. So right now, what you'd be watching for is, I know some of you are like, this is a completely different chart. Not really. It's the same, but it's a little different because I'm using a fan instead of my normal stuff, which is just kind of hand-drawn fans. But yeah, this same deal. If it can break above here and find support back above 2364, that to me would be a really good sign, because I think at that point, if you can find support above 2364 and start advancing, you should be in a good place to call that a spring action. And then I think you're going to start moving back up towards the same ideas, right? Moving back up towards this region. I think 27 and 29 were both critical levels. So that whole pocket right here will matter a lot. It's like the center. And then you would push beyond that and go for it. I think we're going to head towards this trend upward. And that's roughly where it is, like right here. So we'll see. I don't necessarily think it goes all the way to 48. It might. For this one, I'd be looking at what happens around 38 up to about 44, because there probably will be a series of topping actions here. That's my guess before we return back to test the major creek. And I know I'm assuming that it even goes up there, but I think it will based on the setup. That's what I think is going to happen. So the question is really how fast do you get there, and then watching those topping actions take place, I think is going to be a little tricky. You might get a lot of fake outs. So for me, I'm not really looking for much more than like the 36 area before I start thinking about, which is a jump over the creek, before I start thinking about exiting, because I think you're going to come back down and check it. I don't think we're going to leave from there and just go. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll miss out on being a millionaire. But this is what I think will happen. So, okay, well, that's good. So we came back up. So this is different. It's acting different. It's a change of character in some ways. Again, it's hard to say because you never know with this as a range. It could build out like that, right, and go sideways. So still don't want to be in a place where I'm overestimating my chances. But at least for now, it's not going back down after this sell-off, which means that it's found support for now. Okay. Anything can happen. What's going on with IWM? IWM broke out, similar story. So it's got a possibility it could just run, but I think it's more likely we might see it chop a bit before we return to the upside. So hard to say at this point, but maybe one more low here and then it could go. MPW looks so weak. It looks like it's never going to run, but I told you guys, I found out this was a pretty high volatility short squeeze play. I didn't know it was. So there's a lot of possibility for a short squeeze in this one with like a 30% short interest. So it might be a little harder to get this one started, and it may actually start with something crazy like a gap up or something. because the shorts will not want it to go. This is such a weird price action movement right here on GME. Look at that barcoding. So this is definitely like 1, 2, 3 here. You can see the LSPY action. Pump, pump, pump. It's holding really well. Looks bullish to me. Do I think it's going to go back up to 50? Maybe. So based on the previous June top, just depends on how you want to view this. I'm kind of thinking that this move on AMC represents like a June move. I know it sounds weird. And the way I'm building out the range is very much built upon this idea that we're going to trade in a very similar way if we get a second move. So it's basically like a secondary upthrust before a distribution. And that's the way I've been treating the AMC move. For GME, I was trying to think of it more in terms of the AMC move. Like maybe it's going to have its own June move or it runs up to the top and it goes to a new high. That's what happened on AMC. But on GME, that's not what happened. On GME, when it ran in June, it actually never made another high. I'm not saying they're one-to-one, because certainly now you have a very different kind of fundamental argument right now with the amount of cash and all that jazz. But we heard that the bear operator dude, the Citron Research hedge funds or whatever, was like, hey, we're going to be back in at 50 or 40 to 50. They may have in mind something similar. Like this concept of a secondary move up may not go much beyond if it gets shorted down. So a lot of it's going to depend on what happens up here when it gets above the creek. And I can't predict that. I want to be optimistic and say I think it can go to new all-time highs because that's what my previous TA has suggested, that it could easily go up to like 140s. But there's no way for me to validate that until we get some kind of support here, above the creek. So unfortunately, looking back, this never really found support and ended up chopping for several months until November, right? And that second move, which looks so good on AMC, was really just a return back to the top for GME and sort of double topped. So do I think they look kind of similar? Yeah, they kind of do. So it's hard to say. I don't want to be, again, negative about it, but that's sort of what I'm reading into it right now, if anything. Yeah, we'll see. So this is, I think, a creek jump. If it distributes here, it's not a huge deal. I wouldn't flip out. It could just mean we need to go back down and establish a newer support in like a range. This is really the only way you can tell if a range is forming anyways, is like it pushes up and then it distributes and then it comes back down. Okay. So that's basically like an auto reaction. And then you're probably going to build out a range. The range doesn't have to do this. I mean, this looks kind of right, but you could always have a range that just basically comes right back up and finds support and goes. I mean, the range is flexible. But if this tops out and drops below 437 again, my thought is that, all right, you have to find a new bottom. And so my guess is that it's ranging. That's all I could say. Like, okay, it looks like it's about to range. Does that make sense? If it doesn't come below 437, then yeah, you could just get a buy up and push. That happens. GME, I think it's going to go late today into tomorrow. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I can't. I always say that, but it's like people ask for predictions, and all I can tell you is like what I'm observing is a good setup. What I see is a build out to me that looks like a reversal about to happen, and that if it does reverse, it should see a significant move back to the upside going into the end of the week. I think it'd be a very bullish week. But I don't control the markets, and if something weird happens and there's some kind of weird, bizarre reversal or change in the character of the movement, then there's a change in the character of the movement. Sounds like an excuse because it is one. I mean, there's just nothing else to it. You don't control what you don't control. So if something happens incidentally, then you just have to make adjustments and move on. Roll with the punches, as we'd say in boxing, right? So sometimes you see the setup and it really works, and sometimes you see the setup and it doesn't happen, and so you reevaluate and you move back to what you were doing before. This is like the third time we've kind of set this way up. So if it breaks now, I think you've got a lot of strength behind it, but each one of these is laid up and then broken down. This to me looks like a finishing move. Like, that's all I can say about that. It's starting to look like it's a kind of exhausting the sell side here. Like, paper hands are gone, you know, that kind of thing. And I really genuinely believe if it breaks this level, really it's the scan fan. I think it just broke out, more than likely. It didn't break out, it's really close. So it's like right there. I basically think it's out. And then I'm going to look at the final kind of outermost creek. So that I'm just kind of eyeballing, going to the top at 33. And I'm just looking at the outermost pushes here. And that would just tell me kind of where that resistance has been. And we're still not quite out yet, but right there. So I think it's going to go up. That's my short answer. Yeah, I could see IWM going ahead and making a move, but I think it needs to have a support. There's no support yet. So push back down to 200 maybe, or close to it. Maybe 226 or something. There's a little minor support here at 200.20. But something like that. And then I think it could potentially just go. It's out of its trend, so it technically did kind of a fifth wave. And it's looking like a little bit like a reversal action here. It's like kind of an inverted cat ear. Looks really similar to this top though. That's kind of concerning, but yeah, to me it looks like a reversal move. We'll see. Well, we were bullish before it was cool. I don't know. I'm just messing with you. It's not over yet, you know, like if I'm going to be honest with you, like there's part of me that really wants to go ahead and see the move into Wednesday, before Wednesday, because that would be a lot simpler, right? A lot easier to sort of see the move happen and then be like, all right, we're good. But if I'm an operator who's just trying to sow confusion and make people concerned, a Wednesday move might make more sense because you could really wait to the last minute and then drive the price. And so there could be a chopping period here, you know. So I'm all for it. I'm all for the big moves up. I've got the levels marked off. We did it this morning. But this kind of stuff wouldn't surprise me if we formed a range. I'd be like, okay, you know, what are you going to do? So it may make more sense to allow it to be more of a sideways action. No, Skittles! All right. I gotta head out. So my child spilled Skittles all over the couch, so I'm gonna go help clean up. Look, I've done a lot. I've done as much as I can do. I've kind of told you what I think is more likely this week into next. And then I genuinely think that if we're gonna get a big move here, probably now is the time, and we're going to be going up into about July 8th. That's my thought for pretty much the whole small cap market right now. I don't know about today being the day, but sometime between today and early tomorrow, I think you're going to get a move. It's just not possible for me to know if it ranges. I think with the amount of volume here, it's like so light that you could definitely see it ranging and maybe even having like a late day scare. You know, there's just so many things that could happen. So until we see a SOS above the top, all I can say is this: so far so good, right? Like so far so good. So far it looks okay. So far we've got the bottom at 435. We got the sort of reversal on what we think might be the final iteration. We're climbing, you know, this momentum creek out. The next step would be an SOS over the top at 440, and then potentially you could see a nice move from there all the way back up, I think, to 450s. But it's not there yet, you know, just got to be patient. And then GME, it's the same deal. It's kind of walking out. It still hasn't really pushed the creek just yet. I think it's very close. And I think the first move probably moves it up to $24 or $25, excuse me. Pretty fast, but we're not there yet. So these are things that I can't, timing wise, can't easily predict. And there's ways I can do it with the cross trends, you know, we've done this before. But this kind of stuff is, I wouldn't say it's hit or miss. It's just not necessarily going to give you like everything you need for a trade. So this would probably be the first one I'd look at right here. This is a very steep drop and a very steep run right there. So that might be an early way to kind of see it. Again, first thing Wednesday or late Tuesday. So sort of similar moves. And then IWM, same deal. I think it just needs to find a bottom here. A little light bottom would then break it out over this creek, and it'd be probably ready to go back up. We got the gap fill. That's really what we wanted today. Man, MPW is a scary stock. It really is. But I think if it has a move, it would be a monster move. It'd have to move all the way up to 492 at this point. And I don't think it needs to test supports again. It already did that on this way up. So I think it just has to go all the way back up to above 494. Same deal. Monster move going into Wednesday from Tuesday. So I'm making a lot of big call outs today saying it's going to go up into the end of the day. Hope I'm right. Because otherwise it'll be, I don't know, cruddy, I guess. A little bit embarrassing. The volume's not really there yet on AMC. So, I mean, anything can happen. I keep going back to AMC, but yeah. But you know how it is. I'll probably turn it off and something crazy will happen. So best of luck to everybody. I hope you guys have a good day, and we'll follow up if needed. I'll talk to you later.